Welcome to the Occult Rejects. I got a very exciting episode tonight. We got Enigma Seeker coming on with us, Peter, aka Enigma Seeker. And he approached me. He wanted to come on and talk about Atlantis because it's a little bit of a different angle than I think that other people have done on the show. And I'm all about that. That's why we have so many different people on the show at times, because they have different ways of looking at things. So yeah, for sure. And it's going to be an academic kind of angle, and I am very much for that. So I'm very interested to hear what he's got to say. But before we introduce him, we'll introduce the other rejects on the show. And Jules, we'll start it off with you, sir. How are you?
All right. Doing good. What's going on, everybody? I was here last night on the Occult Rejects. I am Jules, the Mississippi Mystic, the host of the Gray Pill Podcast. Go follow me over on Twitter at Gray Pill Pod. Subscribe to my Patreon. Sign up. We got a lot of tiers on there. Got a lot of Patreon exclusive content, merch that we're currently making, and some sticker packs that I have that I'll send you. And yeah, it's a good way to support the show. Be sure to like the stream and share it. Get it out there to the internet waves. Let everybody see. Get some people in here. It's good to be here tonight, though. Very excited to hear what Enigma Seeker has to say.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, for sure.
And shout out to Rebirth, who introduced me. I saw him on your channel.
Right. That's right.
That's how I learned about you guys.
Exactly.
Okay.
Very nice. Yeah, Jules, thank you for making this one. You know, I know you were here last night. I also saw your face this morning for a while. Talking shit this morning. Yo, that was a blast.
This morning was a fun esoteric book review, guys. Yeah. If you haven't checked it out, I don't think it's on X anymore, but it's on Rumble and YouTube for now until probably tomorrow morning. We looked at what was it? The something about
wolves.
Something about wolves.
At first, it was about elves, fauns, and fairies, but the book was coded in some old English language. So we went on to reading the
S and the F's
of Thessaly. Wolf Bitches of Thessaly, brought to you by Manuel Labor, Subliminal Messenger.
Yeah,
it was fun to say the least, and we had some pretty good discussions about it. Stay tuned for what was it? Enchanted Wiggers.
Enchanted Wiggers.
Yeah, the next. Excuse me, the next one coming. Anyway,
what was it? What is it? She Saves Christmas too, right?
Yes,
yeah.
The wolf just save Christmas.
Yeah, sorry. These people, everybody else is like, yo, what the fuck are these guys doing?
No one knows what we're talking
you don't
about.
Want
you gotta be there. It's gonna
Yeah.
disappear. You gotta be there.
But yeah, thank you very much for coming on, Jules. Again, like I know on the weekends you're a very busy man and you tend to make a lot of the shows on the weekend. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, I try.
Hell yeah. And Julia, I mean, out of all people too, just popped out a kid and still jumping on.
Congratulations,
yeah.
Julia.
Thank you. And thanks so much. I always love joining for episodes like this. I love Atlantis. It's one of my favorite topics. But yeah, you know, Cosmic Beach Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Speaking of bitches, I just released an episode about the Ripper crew cutting bitches' titties off and fucking the tit holes. It's crazy. You gotta fucking check it out. It's wild. I'm telling you, you guys, this is some next level shit. And again, if you haven't found me already, you never will. Cosmic Peach Podcast. Thanks for having me, Nick.
Cold intro, dude.
Yeah.
It's a true crime podcast, people. It's a true crime podcast.
Yeah. This is why you're here. Thank you.
Hell yeah.
Definitely. You know what? Actually, out of everybody here on the show, I've probably known Julia the longest. Believe it or not. It's fucking wild. We've been podcasting.
Besties. Like he literally set up the episode where me and my husband worked together for the first time.
Yep.
Wow.
So
yeah,
she's got a new occult reject right there.
Yeah.
All right. Now finally to the man himself, Peter, Enigma Seeker. What is going on, sir? How are you? Would you like to introduce yourself and maybe give a little bit of your credentials, or I could just pull it up. I think you have that ready to go, and let people know where they can find you, or if you have anything you want to promote.
Sure. Yeah. If you want to bring up the first slide, we can start with a little intro. Yeah, so my actual academic background is landscape architecture. So that's kind of where I learned about garden history, design, But before that, it was really I was studying international studies, which deals with like geopolitics, and I took some anthropology, and that's where I learned about Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, which I was leaning to them at that time in my bachelor's, but in my graduate degree, I started shifting away from what they were saying after I did a lot deeper research into the topic of Atlantis. But originally, I was in the Air Force for a little bit, studied Japanese. So I know actually probably more about Japan than I do about Egypt. I am a Catholic, so I do have kind of a biblical worldview, but I'm more of a kind of like an academic Catholic in the sense that I don't, I'm not a young earth creationist, or I'm not, believing some of the things that some Freemasons believe, which are a carryover of what some evangelicals used to believe in, which is more the kind of a literal interpretation of scripture and all that. So I'm a little more liberal on that topic. And I also was a Boy Scout. So, but ufology is probably where I first started when I had my actual woo-woo experience. So I am an eyewitness of the second kind. I have contacted the FBI once. I have talked to Linda Moulton Howe. I have been on
X Linda Moulton Howe
a few times when we were helping her out, cataloging a phenomenon that the UFOs were producing. And that was called the mystery boom phenomenon. And so far, Lou Elizondo has not mentioned it. I'm keeping an ear out for that to see if he mentions that. But that might be in the future. We'll see. But something was going on between the years 2011 and 2014 that caused media reports all around the country to start popping up, local media, and reach national attention once. So that's a whole nother topic, but I addressed this on the YouTube channel Suspect Sky, Adrian's channel, and he has compilation videos about UFOs and unidentified strange noises and other paranormal things. So I've made videos for him a few times. So that's now kind of where I'm shifting. I'm not making as many videos anymore. Back in college I did, but I'm no longer in college, so I'm working now as a landscape designer. And I live in St. Louis, Missouri, but I did graduate from University of Iowa and Iowa State.
Interesting.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. That's wild. You met, yeah, that's the lady with the cow mutilation shits, right?
Yeah. Linda's still kicking. And she actually got a sample of some of those UAP materials that Gary Nowens mentioned and others. So that's pretty interesting that she got to touch that.
How does Lou Elizondo fit in there?
He's the main guy that the Pentagon is using to disclose the whole existence of the supernatural phenomenons. And again, Lou was not privileged to this until someone went to him, and I think that's Mike. I think it was Mullen, or what's his name? The guy that hates Trump, Clapper. Under the Obama administration, those high officials, they're the ones that kicked all this off. So you can see why they probably didn't want Trump in power at the time. One reason. Other geopolitical reasons, of course.
Lots of reasons.
All right. So what got you to interested in Atlantis?
Well, again, it was more studying anthropology at the University of Iowa, and that's where I ran across Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock, of course. But also, it's just like entertainment. I mean, there's an anime called Nadia, which inspired Disney's Atlantis, which I loved both of those, and I think the Japanese one did it a little bit better. Yeah, I like that Disney didn't go straight to Zachariah Sitchin's style and Eric Von Däniken, right. Whereas the original anime Nadia that inspired Atlantis, they were Gainax Studio was inspired by Zachariah Sitchin and Eric Von Däniken, so there was more ancient alien route, whereas Disney did more the spiritual route, which is what Graham Hancock was leaning to. So I think the directors and writers, they were listening to people like Graham Hancock and Zachariah Sitchin and comparing and how they're going to write their story.
What's your thoughts on Zachariah Sitchin?
I'm not an ancient alien believer, and I can kind of explain that more at the end of the slides. No, maybe I used to be, but after experiencing this phenomenon firsthand multiple times as an eyewitness of the second kind, yeah, this shit's not aliens. Wish it was, but wish it was sexy alien girls, but no, I don't think so.
Ooh,
I think it's a lot freakier.
So I think you and I might be in agreement on that. I mean, I think people are seeing something. I think there's obviously some phenomenon going on. I don't necessarily think it's fucking ET, but they are seeing something, they're seeing fucking something.
It's complicated. Yeah. There's something going on. Which David Grush is correct to say that there are biologics 100%, but there's a reason why they're avoiding the specific term of extraterrestrials. in the DoD document, if you read it, they're avoiding that. But there is one clue that David Grush alluded to, and that's the phrase interdimensional. So as a Catholic, when I hear that,
Fuck yeah,
instantly,
that's what I'm.
I think
Yes.
angels or demons or jinns or what Japanese would call yokai or kami.
Big booty alien.
So something a lot deeper than just, aliens and spaceships.
Do you not think that these spiritual beings could take on these physical forms though, or maybe inhabit something of like some kind of biological form?
Yeah, that's what Catholics and Muslims have believed for over 2,000 years, and the Egyptians have believed that. So yes, they physically can take avatar forms, but in limited time and space. So they're basically the gods of ancient past, but they're not all powerful. They do have limitations because ultimately, as the Timaeus and Plato explains, there is a cosmic God that keeps order over the lesser gods, or the word gods and angels and demons are basically the same thing. They're just a semantically different thing based off cultural terminologies. Like the word angel means messenger, but also can refer to watchers, but they're more like militaristic terms. Like, a literal messenger from the military goes out and sends a message. They're using militaristic language in their theology. And that's how the ancient world worked, because there was no separation of church and state in ancient times.
Right.
I'm already on board.
So, for instance,
yes to everything.
Hermes was considered the messenger of Zeus, that he carried the caduceus. Well, the caduceus was based off of this rod that the messengers who observed battlefields would carry so that people wouldn't kill them. So they had this big rod with these white streamers off of the thing. And so he was the angel of the god Zeus, as well as these messengers on the battlefield being the angels of that king, whoever it is commanding the armies.
Yeah, and Hermes is believed, some scholars argue that, like maybe the former Dr. Michael Heiser would argue that Hermes, or the Archangel Michael derived from the inspiration of Hermes motif. And from Hermes, the Greeks got that inspiration from Anubis. So it does go back to the land of Atlantis, is what I argue. The real Atlantis.
Yeah. Most people would connect Hermes with Thoth, but that's the first time I've heard.
Again, I wouldn't get too attached to these names on so-called angels, because real angels, we have no idea what the hell their names are.
Right.
We give these titles, like Gabriel, Raphael, for example. It just means the healing angel, or it's a title phrase. It's not meant to be like literally his name is Raphael. No, there's many iterations of that name that evolve.
That's why in Ceremonial Magic, he's known for being a healing angel, because of what you just said.
Yeah. So when you invoke, like if Catholics invoke that, some Catholics might take it literal, like he's literally named that, but it doesn't really matter. Whatever interdimensional beings around you, they might heal you from, kidney stones or something if you have real severe pain. If depending on your spiritual state, they could intervene. And I think Madame Blavatsky and other occultists believe that yes, you can summon angels through psionics, is now what they're calling it, but it's basically prayer meditation.
Theurgy. Yeah. All right, so
we can go on next time, I guess.
Sure. Oh, that's right. I'm controlling it. My bad. Totally forgot.
Yeah, that's good.
There we go.
So I guess I had a falling away from Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock, mainly because as I studied at McBride Hall at the University of Iowa, is on the upper left hand, that building. That's where I first heard about their names. I'm like, my professor actually mentioned them, so that was interesting. So after he mentioned them, I dug deep and I started to kind of fall for it. And I actually started to believe that maybe Atlantis is basically North and South America. But then I realized that's a mistake, because it was basically Christopher Columbus assuming that maybe that's Atlantis, and he's one of the first to promote this idea. So that's why he named the first islands the Antilles or Antillas. And from there, since Columbus set that precedent, others like Father Charles Brazil de Borghi, I can't say it, he's a French dude, but he's the first one to really fall in love with the Mayan culture. He was a Catholic priest and archaeologist, and he did a lot of work on Mayan history and really trying to analyze that. And I think Dan D.D. Dunker has mentioned him in one of his videos in detail, so I do applaud him for that. But from there, he influenced Ignatius Donnelly, and Ignatius Donnelly was politically motivated more so, and he wanted to put his nationalist place attachment of Atlantis in the Americas, or at least maybe in the Central Atlantic, because there was a basic misconception between Atlantic Ocean and Atlantic Sea. So that's where the confusion's coming about. People thinking it's literally in the Atlantic Ocean, but that's not the Greeks' perspective at the time of, Solon, or the time of even Plato to some extent. So there's some misconceptions on, Graham and Randall are kind of using Atlantis as more of a concept to represent a lost civilization before ours, before the Ice Age. And that's fine. And I told Graham once on Facebook, it would be good to not use the name Atlantis in his documentary, Ancient Apocalypse. And he actually did, surprisingly, avoid using that name, because I think he understands now that, okay, historically, when you look into the deeper writings of Plato, it's pretty clear it has nothing to really do with the Americas. So now it's, people have broadened the term Atlantis to just mean something lost civilization past. And no thanks to Hollywood too. It's really Hollywood that brainwashed a lot of people.
To give you a little bit of pushback, though, we can't forget about Francis Bacon's book, The New Atlantis, which really did inspire a lot of founding fathers in how they wanted to form the country. And
because
that's a big part of our history. That's right.
Yeah,
right.
Because that's why there's the Freemasons, when the early Freemasons came to America, they really thought that the Americas was that continent that Plato was speaking about. But there was simply some translation errors at that early period before Benjamin Jowett updated that. But even Benjamin Jowett, the British translator, got some basic things wrong. But let's say 95% or more is correct. But there's a few things like, is it 9,000 or is it 900? Or do you divide it by the 3 seasons that's matched in the Middle East? Or is it by the lunar calendar? So there's some confusion on the translations. And more than likely, I'm going to have to blame us Catholics for that, because there's probably a bunch of monks in Italy or France that messed up some translations that ended up eventually getting to England. So over time, people thought when the Romans emphasized that the Straits of Gibraltar is this, and this is the new Pillars of Hercules, everyone assumed it was outside that. But when you actually read Timaeus and Critias, it's saying it's subdued inside the pillars, but in the Critias, they're denoting a different pillars than in Timaeus. So there's 2 pillar locations, and that's according to George Sarantites. And I think it was Johanna James who promoted Jack Kelly's documentary, Atlantis Puzzle. And George Sarantites was actually one of my researchers. And he is correct to realize that Atlantis does have something to do with literally North Africa. So credit to Jimmy from Bright Insight for figuring that out as well. Atlantis is definitely associated to the continent of North Africa, but not just Africa. Basically anything that's the Middle East and North Africa to the Greeks was Atlantis, the continent. But the island is something specific. Again, might be a translation there too. Is it island or is it oasis? How do we translate that from Greek to French to Italian, whatever, in English? So there might be some mistakes along there on how Plato is emphasizing the idea of an island. Is he saying island in a poetic sense, or is he saying it actually is like an oasis because Egypt is surrounded by sand, a sea of sand?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's also the esoteric angle of Timaeus and Critias, which seems to get a lot more attention from the academics than the actual idea that there could be one, in reality. Yeah. So they go for that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you're correct. I was going to show you something. Wait, do you see that link down there? Oh, go back. Can you click on that? Maybe you can open that. And I think it was Father Charles that he kind of presented some esoteric ideas. Yeah, and click on that map, 1489. Yeah. Oh. So this is the map that, maybe you can click it again. Oh, I don't know if you can zoom in. But in this map, this is what basically Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock are basing Atlantis on. Because originally, back in the old days, when they wrote maps were more of an artistic thing. It wasn't exactly detailed because they just simply didn't know how to draw the exact shapes of islands and everything. But they're pretty close, maybe 50%, 60%, pretty accurate. But they put the Antilles or Atlantis in these islands near the Azores. And they thought that was associated with Atlantis. Because at this time in the 14th century, some thought that it was outside the pillars. But George Sarantites is saying, no, it's more than likely inside the pillars. And then there's another map that kind of shows why that would be. But that's an interesting map, I thought. But everything Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson believe in is based off this old map that is just saying that it has something to do with the Azores. But that's a misconception because people are still discovering new land. They just simply didn't know the translations because there was no map by Herodotus. The map we see from Herodotus is just made up in the 1800s. It's not something he made up.
Also, Hercules is a character in Greek mythology that represents their ability to expand and go outside of these areas that were known to them before. So the Pillars of Hercules keep getting pushed back the more they discover in Western Europe. And a lot of people don't realize that at the time of Plato, that was a very different place called the Pillars of Hercules than they are today.
Yeah, and there's multiple Pillars of Hercules locations according to what George Strontites found. And he said it's another reference to the Aegean Sea. So if you go back, maybe there's another map I think I have. Let's see if you can go back. You can go back to slides. I think the link's on there. But this is an interesting map, I thought.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Is this one in a book?
To make it larger.
I know the original map, I think it's at the University of Minnesota, but yeah, this is I think it's in a book. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But there's the old cartographer. Now this is the writings of that what's his name? The French priest archaeologist that went to Mexico. So he's the one that started to think that Atlantis was Central America, basically. And he thought that there was a connection with the Bible. And he's correct, but he started to think, in their worldview, as they're discovering new land and they're discovering the mines and looking at these pyramids, they're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So he fell in love with that culture at the time and learning all about it. And he wanted to place it in Central America or have something to do with Central America. But in reality, that's when the Freemasons start to realize, okay, maybe this is not correct. So Freemasons start to really honor Egypt more, which is why a lot of their temples are Egyptian style, because they realize in geopolitical philosophy or terms that Egypt is the first true nation state. And that's because of the typology it has that forced it to be cohesive compared to other regions like Babylon or in China. It took a long time to consolidate power, but Egypt was considered the first true nation state. And that is why the Freemasons honored Egypt so much, because Egypt was kind of like a symbol of America, like a new Atlantis. So
it was
now
the birth of the mystery schools. That's where a lot of mystery
civilization
schools come
basically.
From. Yeah. So
But I mean, I can't read that. It's French, but there are some translations. But this is an original scanned copy of his book that explains. But he started this priest really, he wasn't. I mean, I don't think the Catholic Church really supported it, but his work at the time they accepted it because they're still discovering the new world. To them, it was all new, and it was naturally the logic was, well, this is a new lost world. This is Atlantis. Because they were correlating to this idea that is Atlantis lost. But when you actually read Plato, majority of Timaeus Critias is not about Atlantis. Atlantis is simply the foundation example used for a broader cosmological understanding of the universe to fit to a geopolitical allegory. That's where it gets a little confusing.
Right. He's talking more about the ideal state. And there's this angle that keeps popping up is the city state versus the nation state. And those were
so the Greeks had
really
because the Greeks didn't really have a nation state. They had city states, but when they went to Egypt, there was the first nation state they encountered was Egypt. So they were starting to question about the whole idea of geopolitics and how do you form a state? What's the best way? Do the Egyptians have the best way? But the Egyptians tend to be more authoritarian because they're forced to by agriculture. Whereas in Greece, it's a more sporadically dispersed agriculture between mountains and valleys, and it wasn't as unified. So it took more time for warfare to unify that region by force. But in Egypt, there wasn't as much warfare as like you see maybe in Babylon, because Babylon didn't have a fertile plain, as Plato describes. There was a fertile plain, and he said on either side of this plain, there were mountains, but the translation again for mountains may be partially wrong, but he says they're not very high. So he's implying that you could see across this plain. But then he says there's rivers through the plain. So I'm like, okay. So Ulf Richter of Schwabenheim, Germany is arguing, another researcher, he's saying, well, maybe that's referring to a river valley or a delta. And that's where he kind of correlated. He didn't say Egypt specifically, but he was trying to leave it open to, okay, it must be referring to some kind of natural typology of a river. And there's only a few civilizations in the Middle East that could be. So, but everybody think Pillars of Hercules is the Strait of Gibraltar, and it's correct. Plato was inferring that, but in the Timaeus or Critias, they're referring to two different types of pillars: the Aegean Sea and then the Mediterranean. So the priest of Sais is saying that you Greeks are from the Little Sea and we're from the Big Sea. Okay, they're trying to say we're the older civilization, and you're learning about your lost history from us. So that's why the Greeks are going to the Egyptians to learn about their lost history, or Solon's potential. We don't know if Solon went to Egypt. There's not enough records, but more than likely he did. It wouldn't have been that hard for him to travel over. But imagine if you're a Greek, at the time of 700 BC, and you land in Egypt for the first time, seeing megalithic structures and temples, you would be shocked. It would be an Atlantean kind of world. So it would spark stories and
Right.
all the trade issues and economics and politics, isn't it?
And all the major Greek thinkers had to go to Egypt to be inducted into their mysteries. And Herodotus even writes about this place. We know where it is today, but they're just not willing to excavate it. It's actually in a place that it's like 2 football fields underground. And so this underground mystery school that was talked about in Herodotus was found, but they're just not excavating it. So it makes me wonder about Atlantis and all the rest of this stuff, about what's actually being kept from us and what's actually being let out. But I understand it. It's because there's a dam nearby and the entire place is flooded. So all of this underground chamber that they had is now completely, flooded. It's a giant sewer system, and they don't want to have to mess around with all this hydrology from the dam to actually excavate. So it's frustrating.
The Aswan Dam?
Yeah, it's close to it.
Yeah,
I can pull it
yeah,
up.
they have moved some of the temples, but it does make me wonder if there were a few temples they left underwater intentionally. It's possible, but it'd be literally in modern days we turned Egypt into Atlantis by flooding that part of the region. But the majority of the actual Atlantis, the island, was the delta. Like that was the geopolitically most important locations to the Persians, to the Greeks, because that's where they got their beer, their bread, and it's shipped up by the Phoenicians into Greece and into the Tartessian region of Spain and Italy. When we go back to the slides, I can kind of explain more.
I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
Are you familiar with Gary Wayne at all? Like the Genesis 6 guy? Are you familiar with him?
Is that the paper by the CIA called Eden? Are you referring to?
No, he's he
Insect
talks a
conspiracy.
lot about Jules, you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, I keep having a couple people trying to pressure me to get him on. I need to hit him up.
Yeah, he's really cool, but he
He
talks
is, yeah.
a lot about Atlantis, and one of his theories is like Atlantis was like this huge city, and places like Egypt and
It was a worldwide civilization, and
right,
maybe there was
yeah.
a capital, that the island may have been the capital or the place where they
That's partially
convened, because there were 12 families, I think, rumored to have had control of these civilizations, and the head of it being Atlas, right? This god Atlas.
And then Egypt and those places are they're like satellite cities to Atlantis. They're like little breakaway. I'm glad you're here, Jules, because you said it more.
But,
you said it better than I did. But yeah, that's basically the theory. And I think, it could have legs,
Yeah.
I think if you make the claim too big, it becomes unrealistic to actual archaeological records. So that's where maybe he might have too much of a new age perspective, and he makes the story bigger than it really is. And that's what that priest did. And, it was Ignatius Donnelly and that priest, and eventually Graham Hancock Randall. They're making the story so much bigger than it really is. In reality, it all goes back to the origins of geopolitics and the origins of agriculture and history. It doesn't have anything to do with the New World of Central America or South America. So I wouldn't broaden it that much, because we would have abundant amounts of evidence of that if you're making such a massive claim. Now, I don't know who this guy is, but someone like Zachariah Sitchin and Eric Von Daniken, they make these stories so much bigger than it really is. And I think that's called the historian's fallacy, where we're trying to paint our globalistic worldview to this lost civilization, but in reality, we would have found that evidence by now, and wouldn't be spear points and a few arrowheads. It would be very clear, steel swords petrified in stone, or foundation stones, or granite slabs. Because if you go to corporate buildings today, a lot of them have lots of slate of granite everywhere for their buildings and their fancy lawyer offices, and you would find that stuff. It would be buried over time, and when it's buried, it's actually preserved compared to being
so
above
crazy
ground.
how much we agree and disagree at the exact same time. So I'm fully on board with the idea that there could be this Egyptian Atlantis idea, right? I think that's definitely a possibility. But at the same time, I look at all of the Ogum text and all the rest of these dolmens in North America and these other things, and I'm like, well, this kind of seems a little bit Atlantis too. I think there's probably a lot of different, combinations or recombinations of how people went back and forth across the Atlantic that maybe didn't get recorded and didn't have much to do with Timaeus and Critias that were happening
that's where
at the same
you're
time.
stretching the story away from the primary source, which is Plato in his Timaeus Critias and the Republic. See, we can't take Atlantis out of the context of the work of the Republic, which is completely about which civilization? The Persians. And which civilization built round cities? The Persians. They have two of them. You can see them from satellite view. One's called Darabagerd, one's called Gore. So is there a possible conflation that Plato is taking Persian motifs and infusing that with Egyptian motifs and possibly Hittite, because he's just basically saying anything that's not Europa is Atlantis. So that's why the Atlas Mountains are named Atlantis. That's why Atlantia sometimes is referred to the Romans as Ethiopia. So Jimmy is right to put it back in Africa, but we want to make the story bigger. Now, there might be other civilizations that are lost, but they have nothing to really do with Plato's Atlantis. Like, Göbekli Tepe is very close, to Greece in some sense, but Plato had no idea of that civilization. He didn't care about that. What he cared about is the brown people conquering the white people, because the Hittites and the Assyrians and the Egyptians were the big empires of the time, and they were starting to expand up into Greece. So this was the Proto-Hellenes, would have been the Mycenaeans. And actually the Mycenaeans probably would have been darker skinned, a little bit more tan, Mediterranean at that time, because the Mycenaeans mixed with the Minoans, and the Minoans definitely traded with the Egyptians. And there's one... well, I kind of follow my slides here. Actually, we can go to the next slide so I can get a bearing where I'm at. So basically, it just makes logical sense to ask the question, if Plato says that Atlantis stretches from Libya to Asia, and he says it's bigger than that, he's referring to this vast continent. And that vast continent has to be Africa and Asia, or specifically the Middle East, because he's talking about a war he's emphasizing. And in Freemasonry, there's a lot of kind of, understanding of the kind of the political worldview, but also spiritual mixed. And so the Freemasons and the Vatican and the Persians and the ancient Greeks, they all honored Egypt because Egypt came first before anyone else when it comes to the first true nation state. So, Harry S. Truman was a 33rd degree Freemason, I believe he was. And, he probably understood that it had something to do with Egypt. And that's why you have an obelisk in the center of Washington, D.C., and why a lot of Freemason temples are inspired by Egyptian architecture, because they were the first architects. They were the first nation state, the political entity that unified first before Babylon. It wasn't until Sargon of Akkad came and forced unification and developed the Akkadian civilization. So when people say, oh, the Garden of Eden is Suber, no, that Suber was no paradise. It was a hellhole. 10 degrees hotter on average in Egypt, not a Mediterranean climate. There's no black soil to create enough fertility for agriculture. And there's no monumental architecture at the level of Egypt. So it's so stupid that evangelicals kind of latch onto that. But that's just a misconception, because over time, when they first discovered and learned about the Muslim world, they're confusing some of the Muslim writings with the biblical text, and they didn't have all the biblical text. So they start to think, well, maybe it's literally Babylon over here, but over time, place names changed. There was a place called Babylon Fortress in Cairo, but also Babylon in Iraq. And there's the Gihon River was sometimes associated with the Nile, but then there's land of Kush can be Ethiopia, but also in Iran. So it gets confusing because these place names are being recycled over and over. That's why it's confusing. But one thing we know for sure, it's not Easter Island, as Dan D. Dunker might argue. It has nothing to do with that, because Plato says elephants.
Well, there was a species of elephant that went extinct with the end of the Carthaginian Empire that was in North Africa. So they had
Small one.
a smaller version. That's what they took across the Alps. Was this other
and they got those
species
from
of,
Africa. There's a small species, not small, I mean, relatively small to the main elephants in sub-Saharan Africa, but there was a North African elephant, and the Egyptians basically killed them off or used them in warfare, or maybe for labor as well. So that's not out of the question, but they were a hindrance to their agriculture. So the Egyptians basically wiped them out, and then the Romans eventually too, but they used them for, eventually into circuses and things like that and for display. But yeah, they got up to, I think, islands near Greece or Crete, and spread up into Rome. So there were these elephants. So when Plato speaks about that, they did exist at the time in that region. They got them through trade from Egypt.
well,
so they're fucking elephant killers. That saddens me. I love elephants.
Yeah, that's
Well, the
Are
elephants
you
were stomping their crops.
But they're so cute. Listen, are you saying Egypt could be Atlantis? Like, that's the misconception, is like they came up with this name Atlantis, but really they were describing Egypt. Is that like the takeaway here?
That's what, when some of the dialogues in Plato speak, they say, "Oh, you Socrates always make up stories about Egypt." There's some phrase like that, because that's exactly what Plato's do. Plato is taking Socrates' ideas and making up a story about Egypt. He's basically using Egypt as an allegory, but putting a good spin on it against the other Atlanteans. And there's another Atlanteans that everyone forgets, and it's associated to the war. And it's not the Egyptians, it's the Hittites, Turkey, Anatolia. So again, that's why I say Plato says across the sea. So across the Greek world, either through the Aegean Sea or all the way down to Egypt and Palestine. That region was another world to them, completely different typologies. That was the Atlantean old world. So when Plato speaks about the Callipolis in the Republic, he's speaking about the future new world of the Greek world, and using democracy, well, semi-democracy, but they didn't allow women to vote. But they're debating about whether to keep that monarchic system or democracy. And there's a divide. And when Plato's writing the story, he's keeping in context of the Persian Wars. So to Plato, Persia is the Neo-Atlanteans, hence why there's round cities. So there actually are 1 mile diameter long palace round cities that are completely wiped out over time by Alexander the Great and other wars. And he's associating with the Persian world order, and Egypt is a part of that, but he wants to put a good spin sort of on Egypt because they want to make an alliance with Egypt against the Persians. And he's talking about an older war. They're saying, hey, if we can beat back the Persians because we did it before, and the Egyptians said we did it before, and that old war was with the Hittites. Now I'll show you my sources on that. We can go to the next slide and I can explain where I get that from.
Did you watch Black Panther Part 2?
No,
by any chance? I was just gonna say they put a lot of shit in the Marvel movies. Obviously, a lot of people know about that, but they made it seem like, and also like Aquaman, right? With Atlantis, like it still exists and it's all sunken and shit. So you don't believe any of that stuff? Like it's somewhere sunken and fucking artifacts. Julia, and
Egypt does have ruins underwater, and now maybe they don't go back to the time of the actual date of the Santorini eruption, which is 1600 BC. And if you take away the 9000 and use the 900 date, which is what these authors are all arguing. And so these researchers are basically saying, it doesn't make logical sense. If they say that Proto-Athenians existed, who could that be? It must be the Mycenaeans. And once in the 1950s, we learned about the Santorini eruption. We realized that the Santorini eruption was a big major event. It was not just your normal volcano eruption. It was actually a supermassive volcano going boom with 2,000 megatons. Castle Bravo is 50 megatons. So John G. Bennett and J. Gwynn Griffiths and Ryan Carpenter, they're all saying it has to do with Santorini. But what's confusing is they thought this associated Atlantis is the Minoans. No. Plato is clear that it's across the Atlantic Sea. And the original Atlantic Sea, according to George Sarantides and others, is the Mediterranean. It's not the Atlantic Ocean, because you got to rotate that map, and the way the Greeks are looking at the world is they're saying across the sea there's this paradise island filled with elephants, and Plato says it doesn't rain, and there's monumental architecture and all that. So he's using Egypt as that island within the larger continent.
Everybody forgets about the 10,000. So in 401 BC, you have this group of 10,000 mercenaries who were hired by a Persian prince to go invade the land of Sumer. And this is where they find out about all of these really ancient structures that they didn't know existed. So there was a whole civilization over to the east of them that they had just discovered. This is one of the reasons that, Alexander the Great went as far east as he did, is because he was reading the stories of the 10,000 and he wanted to find out what was actually happening in the ancient world, because this was far more ancient than what they had. So a lot of that stuff really did influence Plato later on.
Yeah, it ultimately is related to the Persians, because the Persians are the real Aryans, the original Neo-Atlanteans, I guess, in some sense, that some of these authors would argue. But like the main author, J. Gwyn Griffiths, he's looking at the actual descriptive details in Timaeus and Critias, and he's realizing there are certain descriptives. Like he noticed that I misspoke a little bit on Mike and Dave's podcast, but it was actually J. Gwyn Griffiths that argued that Plato's leaving some things out. He's not mentioning certain things like the coconut. So there's no coconut. But he does mention that there are like palm trees, and there's legumes and cereals and certain other, he says there's allotments of agriculture, flat plain, elongated. So all these other descriptives seem to be alluding to Egypt, especially when he says it doesn't rain in Atlantis, only in the winter times. So that clearly puts it back to North Africa, because people think that, oh, it never rains in Egypt. No, it does rain in Egypt. So that's where, Randall Carlson, Graham Hancock, and Robert Val might be getting things wrong, because they say, oh, there's no rain on the Sphinx. No, it's rain. Egypt just had a flood back in like 2020 or 2023, I think it was. It was like 3 inches of rain in like 1 hour. So they do get erosion. So there's clear evidence of Mediterranean metacanes coming in once in a while. I mean, there's one that killed 20,000 people like 3 years ago. I think it was in Libya. That's because of a flash flood. So it does rain in Egypt, just not as often, mostly in the wintertime. So Plato says that detail, and he says that detail. He's like, okay, this has to do with something to do with North Africa, because he says this island of Atlantis faces the sea. So Plato's trying to describe a delta. It's literally facing the sea, and there was a shoal of mud. There was liquefaction. He didn't say the word liquefaction, but he's saying Atlantis was sinking. So if there's a massive earthquake caused by a supermassive volcano or a tsunami, a combination of multiple things, then the delta would sink, and there would be mud in the way. And we see buried ruins underwater in Egypt.
Right. And you could even see, again, back to Alexander the Great, where did he make his city? Is right at the end of the Egyptian delta. He's thinking about the same sort of Atlantis type idea. That's why he's picking that area. And he's the one who surveyed it and created the outlook, or the outlay for the city before it was even built. So there was a lot of influence.
That's the confusion. If you go to the next slide, the confusion is between 3 scales. Plato gives us one scale, the continent. The second scale is the island in a continent, which is a little weird. And then he says the city-state. The question is he conflating the Persian cities, assuming they're just as old as Egypt, with Egypt? Because sometimes they believe that Egypt was kind of like the Persians. They were a big empire, and maybe the Egyptians kind of lied and said, oh yeah, we were a big empire. We conquered those Hittites and those Persians. They could have been lying, because there's a legend of Sisistrisus. And Sisistrisus was a pharaoh to believe that conquered Anatolia. Because if you look at, Hittite architecture and styles, it's clearly influenced by Egypt. The styles and the rulership system is modeled off of Egypt, and their influence that, because they were trading, and eventually they were even exchanging, princes and princesses, and having treaties, and eventually they had a war at the Battle of Kadesh. So to the Greeks, they're conflating a few other regions in the Middle East with round cities, but it's possible there was a round lost city-state in Egypt, because the Egyptian hieroglyph for city is a circle with an X. So it's possible Egypt may have once had a round city at the capital of Heliopolis, but it's been so recycled over and over, with Cairo, modern day Cairo being built on top, it would be almost impossible to find it because you got a whole city on top of it, because Egypt's been so recycled, because the density of the region is so dense. And that's why we call it this garden paradise, the original Garden of Eden. So Plato's Atlantis is basically one and the same with the story of the Garden of Eden. He's probably reading Ugaritic text or something, and he's putting his own spin on it for political reasons.
Right. And that Ugaritic text was the unification of Hittite culture and Egyptian culture, because they were right there on that borderline, and they took all of those elements from both into their mythology and into their architecture and all the rest of that stuff as well. And they played a huge role in the formation of the Canaanite Phoenicians later on. So, you've got all of these different influences creating this milieu. And especially in Egypt, it was recycled by the Greeks later on because they were obsessed with Egypt. That's one of the reasons why Alexander went down there and why his generals occupied that place as the Ptolemies for hundreds of years after. So
they needed the wheat is the main thing. They needed, if you got the origins of agriculture established in Egypt, Greece didn't produce as much agriculture until their empire expanded. But yeah, that's where like the Persians conquered Egypt, because they wanted their agriculture, because that was literally a garden paradise. So when Plato emphasized about in the Timaeus this lush paradise, these allotments, and they're ruled by 12 kingdoms, which is a reference most likely to the nomarchs of Egypt, where you have a governorship, which is why the Freemasons kind of honored Egypt, because you have there's the governor regions, and then there's one president, one pharaoh that rules them all, and they're not allowed to war with each other. It was actually it was when they became too avarice in their power and they want to expand. So this is where maybe Plato or Solon is conflating the Hittites with the Egyptians, because they're basically saying, oh, they're one and the same. And they're not really, but they're influenced by Egypt, sure. But that's where the point is, they're conflating that because of the Persians, because the Persians did occupy all of Egypt and the Hittites. So they're saying there was an older Atlantic kingdom before the Persians. And that's a reference more likely to the Trojan Wars. That's the war that Plato's inferring upon in Homer.
Prior to the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse wiped out the memory of the ancient world, and that's what they were constantly trying to get back, is that memory before the Bronze Age collapse.
Yeah, but there was a lapse of time in Greek civilization that not much was really going on. It was slow progression until they recovered after the Santorini eruption. So 1600 BC, boom, the war stops. So basically, Plato's implying that both sides were destroyed in this war, the Greeks and the Hittites. And the Egyptians are telling the story as a sort of an outside perspective, although in the next paragraph, this is where it gets confusing, because Plato's saying first the island of Atlantis, and then he jumps to talk about the war. So people would think, oh, well, it was the people from the island that are the ones causing the war. No, that's not actually what the Timaeus and Critias is saying. It's just there's a paragraph change, and he's just talking about a different region now. So Plato's scaling out now, and that's the problem, because back in those days, they have a good sense of location and bearing. So Plato first starts at this large scale continent, then the island, then the city-state, and conflating that and the war with maybe being Egypt too, because the Egyptians might want to take credit saying, yeah, those Hittites, they were part of our civilization, because that goes back to the legend of Pisistratus.
In a way, it's so important for people to remember the esoteric nature of this. He's combining a bunch of locations and a bunch of different data to paint a picture of what he's trying to get across as the political message behind the piece that he's writing.
Yeah, and more likely it's the biblical stories, well, not modern day Bibles, but the actual scrolls of ancient times from the Hebrews, from the Zoroastrians, and the Babylonians, and the Hindus as well, specifically in Pakistan, the Indus Valley, when they talk about this dark Kali age, it is a reference to an actual event that happened. Because people think this supermassive volcano, oh, it's just that local region, but no, it would have a climactic effect over the whole planet. Just as the Mount Tambora had effect, like in the 1800s, it would cause more rain events on rivers. It might make things cooler for about 1 or 2 years. Temperature could drop, agriculture starts to die off in Europe, so people will start flooding down, and that's where you get the Indo-Aryans. They start moving south. So something happened in the Indus Valley that forced a migration from the Oxus civilization down into India. And that's where you get the so-called reference to Indo-Aryans, but it's really the Oxus civilization that gave birth to the Iranians and eventually moved down into the Vedic cultures and established that. Now, Indians, they obviously are a little nationalistic, so they have debates about that. They don't like the idea that it was the Oxus civilization came down, but the archaeological record shows that Mohenjo-Daro and other cities in Pakistan, they just kind of just collapsed right around the year 1700 to 1600 BC. And that happens to be around the Santorini eruption. So something may have caused a climactic shift that shifts the geopolitical chessboard.
It also hit the Mesopotamian region really hard too. This is, a major collapse in that time period as well, right?
Yeah, so that's where the biblical stories come in. So people think the flood story is separate from the Garden of Eden story, but in reality, they're the same. They're just separated by different scribes or trying to maybe make it more simplistic, to make it more allegorical or more detailed. So it wasn't until the Akkadian periods that these records start coming out. And it shows from the Eridu story, we can actually date the actual artifacts, and we can logically say, well, if that tablet is actually dated to around 1600 BC, they might have wrote that story, a few 50 years or maybe 20 years after the event. Same thing with the Mahabharata. All these stories were written after the Santorini event. We can carbon date all this stuff, and they're all dating after that. They're not dating older, but people think that the Bible story, the Genesis, that's 2000 BC, the flood happened. No, the oldest evidence that dates to these tablets are no older than 1600 BC. And the maximum date for the Santorini eruption is 1700 BC. So I think something happened in the Mediterranean region, because the priest of science is saying the destruction happened in the homeland of the Greeks. You Greeks were destroyed and you lost your history, basically. But the Nile, we recovered faster. And naturally, the most powerful civilization at the time would recover faster and would not be destroyed. So the logic that, an advanced civilization would get destroyed and be completely wiped out is illogical, because it would be harder to erode a civilization that produces more shit compared to a small civilization.
Right. And they had the food, they had the floods, they had the food. And that was the most important part in building back whatever civilization they had. So, I mean, that was the breadbasket of all of the Mediterranean, can't go ignored as this powerful force in that civilization, as well as a powerful spiritual force in all these different regions as well.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a connection, as these other authors I showed. They all say that there must be some connection back to the biblical record. So Plato is basically taking these Mesopotamian stories and Egyptian stories, because Egypt has records of a massive rain event called in the Tempest Stela, and they dated that to around 1550 BC. So pretty close to the date. And when you actually take the translation of the 900-year hypothesis, it puts that to around 1550 BC. Now, give or take a margin of error of maybe 50 to 100 years. So I'm open to the possibility that there are some carbon dates that are slightly off by maybe 50 to 100 years, because we do have like the Dixon relic in the pyramid that is dated to over 3000 BC. Now they say, well, maybe that's very old wood. Possibility, but I highly doubt it. They probably took the wood from a branch, more likely, which the branch would be younger than the center core of a tree, So it's possible there are margin of errors. I'm not ruling that out, but I can't jump to what Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock say, because we need the swords. Okay, we have dinosaur bones. Where are the swords? Okay, we got stuff that's very old and preserved. We should have petrified artifacts of something really old, but there's nothing in the Ice Age that we have found that's very tangible.
That could go to a lot of channelers. That could go back to a lot of channelers. So if you look at the channeling of the sleeping prophet, what's his name? I keep forgetting his name.
Edgar Cayce.
Edgar Cayce.
Edgar Cayce. Yeah, when he talks about Atlantis, he's talking about a different type of technology altogether, sort of like a crystalline technology, but not necessarily more advanced in terms of weapons and armor and all the rest of this stuff. He's thinking more of like crystallography or some kind of resonant technology. And we see in all of these dolmens and all of these different structures. Right. You see these different type of spiritual focuses on megalithic sites, as opposed to having, the best swords and the best weapons. And, it's more of a shift away from that, more towards the interior world as opposed to the exterior world.
But again, Edgar Cayce is being influenced by the old occultic age in the 1800s, or even before that by that one priest and Ignatius Donnelly, and their worldview was so fixated on the Americas. And Edgar Casey's making the story bigger than it really is. It's more of a spiritual allegory for him. And I think he even mentioned like flying cars. I don't think Atlantis had that. No, again, that's the concept idea of Atlantis. And that's because, I think the occultists in the 1800s really wanted to make Atlantis bigger than it really was, because they're trying to make some sense of the world at the time. Because
Edgar Casey was actually
was still being born, sort of.
Right. Edgar Casey he was actually saying that they were not as advanced as all the rest of the more flowery authors have put it. He just said that they had a different way of achieving some similar things without having all of the.
He said they had flying cars.
Yeah, because
he said they had flying cars,
like chariots of the gods. That sort of.
Yeah, Plato does mention chariots. Yeah, Plato mentions chariots. He mentions horses, of course. He mentions big clue is he uses Atlantis boasts the most ferocious animal in the land. Okay, well, what could that be? The hippo, the lion. More than likely, the lion is what he's referring to, but he says it kind of in a poetic way. He's trying to basically describe Africa to the Greek world that's never visited Africa for the first time. They've never seen a lion in their life. So he's kind of talking. Imagine him talking in an amphitheater. Stage, and he's trying to exaggerating what Socrates is saying. Socrates boasts crazy stories about Egypt and the Middle East from Herodotus and others.
There is a Middle Eastern lion. There's a Mediterranean lion that used to live back in that time period that's now completely extinct as well. So it's the same situation as the elephants. Like there are these animals that they're talking about, but we don't.
Barbary lion, I think it was called.
Right.
Yeah. So that existed possibly even at the time of the Greeks. It's more than likely, but majority of those animals that Plato's describing, he's referencing to what the writings of Herodotus is giving to him. So more than likely, it's logical. We don't know Plato used Herodotus, but it's logical. He was probably reading Homer. He was probably reading Socrates and Solon and Herodotus and others. So that's where he's getting his information from. And it's possibly Plato even visited Egypt. Some scholars say he even visited Egypt. So if he did, he probably was like, ooh, I got to tell a story. And also there was a Heliki earthquake that happened in Greece. It was a small earthquake, but killed a lot of people. It might kill people he knew. So that may have triggered also his story or reminded him of an older story that Solon was speaking of and Socrates. But again, referring to Edgar Casey's idea of Atlantis, I think he's still making it bigger than it really is. And I don't think it has anything to do with a global civilization whatsoever. Now, global at the time of the Egyptians' perspective, we are the center of the world. And even to this day, they're sort of like the center of the world.
In terms of channeled material, I just take it as a spiritual lesson. Like he's not necessarily giving us the actual facts, but he's sort of spiritualizing what he sees as this vision of Atlantis and all the rest of the stuff as well. So it's far more spiritual than it is actual factual. But for him,
I would say more geopolitical because he's using cosmological terminology. But at the end, it's about politics. It's about rulership. How do you set up a kingdom, a nation state? And the Greeks are trying to learn from the Egyptians. So he's using the old world as an example. The old world to them was the Middle East.
Well, in America, it was the mound builders, right? And so you have that influence with Casey as well.
Yeah, again, I think Casey was more influenced by, what's his name? Ignatius Donnelly. And I think, again, you can't let your nationalism or place attachment of your culture where you're living now dictate actual writings of the perspective of Plato and Solon, because they were just concerned about the Persians. Okay, the big bad Persians out to get them, and they wanted to blame the Persians and the Hittites. And that's it's always politics that's influencing stories, even in the biblical stories. People think, oh, Adam and Eve living peacefully in the garden, but in reality, if you think about it, it's a smaller allegory, simplistic creation story to describe a larger event. And that's elaborated in the Exodus. So the Exodus is just the elaborated version of Genesis. They're not separated by time and space necessarily. So the so-called character of Moses and character of Noah may have been living at the same time. Whoever they symbolize, they were probably Egyptians more than likely. it's so fragmented because all this stuff was consolidated under King David and Solomon, and they're trying to figure out who the hell all these characters are. And there's different translations, and they didn't have Google Scholar to figure it out, so they just started amalgamating it all together and smushing it, and thinking that these characters were literal, or they tried to piece a new creation story to fit their new national identity in the Palestinian Israel region, because they wanted to break away from Egypt. Because remember, Egypt controlled Palestine, and the Hittites did too for a very long time, and the people living there were always kind of had animosity against the Egyptians and the Hittites, because those were the two big superpowers.
Well, the Hittites certainly, or Ugarit certainly had a lot of animosity towards the Egyptians. They, in fact, inverted the Egyptian pantheon just to get back at them for being, sort of slave or servant to them for so long. So they had a real inversion to Egyptian theology, which I think plays out again and again in the Bible.
Yeah, it's ironic because the origins of basically monotheism probably started in Egypt, and then it morphed over time from influences evolving into Zoroastrianism and eventually the Hebrew gods. But again, they're more tribalistic, and at the time, it's like, this is our God. Our God's better than your God. In reality, there is a source, and you have to find, where's Atlantis? Where's the original Garden of Eden? And if you look at the topological and geographic and geopolitical origins and archaeological record, Egypt's the elephant in the room. It's not Sumer. It's not Easter Island. It's not Mesoamerica at 3,000.
What about Florida? I have definitely it on good authority that shit's in Florida.
I was about to say, man, I mean, what if, there's one time where the whole world was one continent, and what if it's separated? It fits perfectly into that gap right there in the Mediterranean. That's all I'm saying.
I'm pro Florida on that.
I don't think Plato was thinking that big.
Right,
big in time. Yeah. He was concerned about the damn Persians, because they want to blame everything on the Persians, even though in reality it might have been the Mycenaeans that started the Hittite Trojan Wars. But it's the victory, is written by the victors, I guess. I can go to the next slide. Yeah.
Well, in the 68,
Ireland, no.
Quick question.
North Pole, no.
I don't know, man. Ireland.
That's a bunch of BS.
I don't know, man. See, I think there's stuff that, I think we're not told 100% the truth of everything, so there's some things we kind of have to come to our own conclusions about. And,
but it's not really hidden. It's like, people say, well, why did I learn about this in high school? Because high school is supposed to be a prison where they keep kids off the street so they learn some basic math and shit. Okay, you don't learn real history until you get into college. So in college is where I learned about these researchers. I have more researchers and essays. And now I learned that Egypt literally has ruins underwater, okay? And there's no other civilization that has ruins like this underwater. And sure, they're only dated to May 400 BC. Some could be older to 1400 BC, but I bet there's a lot more on the east coast of the Delta, probably a couple hundred yards out into sea underwater, maybe under 30 or 40 feet of water. I bet there's a lot more ruins, and a lot more under Cairo, but there's a big city in the way. But it's the only civilization that built a giant, massive pyramids, and there's nothing on the planet. There's nothing else. We was founded by now by LiDAR scans or whatever, satellite scans, and there's nothing. Okay. Bosnian pyramid? No, that's not a pyramid.
So just to give you my Herodotus reference real quick. So if you could add my thing to the stage, I'll put yours back up in a second. So this is from the recent discovery in the Mahata expedition in 2008. They used ground-penetrating radar at the Hawara Pyramid and found evidence of a massive underground structure talked about in Herodotus. And he says, underground, there's 3,000 rooms. And so they found it, and they're not doing anything to excavate it. So in terms of cults and the origin of these things, I think that's one of the most important sort of factors.
But again, you need to question if the translation for the word 3,000 is correct, because again, it's in English, and how many times has it been translated? It could have been maybe 30 rooms. It could have been 300. So you have to dig a lot deeper to that specific story and find out the source. Like even the legend of Tartessos. Everyone thinks Tartessos is Spain. No, it's Italy. Okay, the original Tartessians, when you read details into that from Herodotus and others, you realize there are motifs and details that seem to point more to Italy because the Greeks first landed in Italy before they ever landed in Spain. But over time, the nationalists in Spain adopted the story and placed it in Tartessos because there was a reference to the Pillars of Hercules and it was the Straits of Gibraltar, but it was inside that. But they assumed it had to be Spain because a bunch of nationalists in Spain wanted it to be Spain. Same thing with Nazi Germany. They wanted Atlantis to be, associated with white people, even though Plato literally says there are elephants and it doesn't rain only in the wintertime. And when he says winter, it's like people get, winter, it must be snow. No. So you got to look at these other details and realize that Plato's giving us all these clues. He says the phrases like cereals and legumes. He says the island faces the sea, but the word island could be a translation for oasis. And then he says it lives under the light of the sun, which is a poetic way of saying it's in a desert. Well, he says there's horses, ferocious animals. He uses the phrase Atlantic pelage, not Atlantic Ocean. So there's different phrases for water types in Greek. An original one was Atlantic pelage or Atlantic pelagos. And that's because there's two references of seas. So that's where that confusion comes about. He also references that there are 12 kings, but one sovereign. That's kind of like how Egypt's monarchic system was established. There were main nodes of Egypt, nomarchs, they call them. He also references the gods. And we know that Poseidon has always been associated with the Atlantean world, not the Greek world. The Greek world is the Hellenes to Athena, not related to Poseidon. Poseidon, they say, went down to the land of Ethiopia and had a party or something, or sometimes referred to Atlantia in the Roman translations. So that's
Minoans,
to the Africa.
That's what the Minoans also had interactions with Poseidon as well, who gave them the white bull that ends up becoming the father of the Minotaur. And
where do bulls come from?
Well.
There were no bulls in Europe in the Ice Age.
Right.
So the origins of the aurochs is a European. Is an African bull, or not Caucasian, but in the Caucasus regions in Iran as well. So we can figure out the migration of bulls and figure out where did the bull cult come from. It came from the Middle East because that's where the migration of bulls went up to. And once the Ice Age retreated, they went up that way. But majority of the bull domestication happened in the Middle East. Same with horses. Horses first were domesticated by the Indo-Aryans in Ukraine, but then they went down to across the Black Sea into Italy. Be confused. Anatolia, Turkey, and then it was the Hittites that really domesticated it, and they sold them to Egypt, and then Egypt became a real power once they had horses. So horses are a major influence on the development of an advanced civilization. Without the horse, you would not be an advanced civilization, and that's why the Native Americans were not able to fully consolidate power. Fracture because they couldn't move fast enough, and also there's too much land. So the geography really dictates how civilization is baked and bubbled up and mixed.
Have you ever looked at the way horses migrated?
Yeah, there are two types. It's mainly the brown horse that came down to Turkey.
They started. I thought there was some that actually started in South America.
The Ice Age ones, but they're extinct. So these we can
just say that
look at the genes of modern day horses and figure out where they come from.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean,
I think
that's a stretch because you're going to have to go in the Ice Age. But Plato is saying it doesn't rain, so he's referring to a desert region. And again, you got to put in Plato's perspective,
think about
not
that.
our globalistic perspective.
Maybe you're not getting much rain; it's all snow.
Okay, so this is where semantics are playing.
Yeah, you're using semantics to prove that.
Maybe Plato was a sadistic fuck, and he made all this shit up, like the fucking cities of gold and shit, to make people want to go on a wild goose chase for this shit that never existed. Just a thought, but I don't necessarily know if he didn't make all this shit up, or like just jam a bunch of like random facts together from different places he had seen and was like, there's this mystical place and it's called Atlantis. It's like, fuck you. Why? Because you so I don't know. I just, sometimes I struggle with this stuff. Is it real?
So he's not really saying
is it even real?
I feel you.
Like, for example, he says there's monumental architecture and there's three main types of stone used in that. There's red, white, and black. Okay, what did Egypt have? It had black diorite, white limestone, white alabaster, and red granite. So, I mean, and then he says, there was a major war. We know what he's getting that. He's probably getting that from Homer, the Trojan War, because that was a big deal to the Greeks because of the Hittites. So he's definitely getting motifs from the Middle East because he says phrases like, there was rivers and there was lots of canals and these canals branch off rivers. Well, that's what Egypt had. But then he says there are lofty mountains. Okay, well, now he's expanding the scale because he's talking about the continent. So he's probably referring to the Atlas mountain range. So that was part of Atlantis. So Jimmy's right to associate with North Africa. It's not the Eye of the Sahara. Okay, there's no obelisk and pillars or whatever. There's no monumental architecture on the foundation bedrock of the Eye of the Sahara, of the Rikat structure. So that's way out of the context of where Herodotus traveled. So wherever Herodotus went, that's what Plato's referring to. And he didn't go down that far south. Now, Hana the navigator did travel around West Africa, and he went down. We don't know exactly how far, but probably about center of Africa, then he went back. So those travels may have influenced Plato as well. But Plato, again, if you listen to Timaeus Critias, it's saying within two types of pillars, inside the big sea, but also conquering the little sea, and the little sea is the Greek sea. According to the two priests, there are two priests that were speaking to Solon. We can go next slide if you want.
All right, listen. Nice. Here we go.
So the basic timeline I would put this at is basically at the Santorini eruption. So I do have to agree with scholars that it has something to do with Santorini. Every scholar I've ran across ended up back at this date of 1600 BC. So you've got the Atlantean world, which is the Middle East, basically, and then the Tartessian world, which is the Roman Greek world. And that didn't start until definitely after the Bronze Age collapse, and the Romans really started to gain a lot more power in Italy. And Tartessos really wasn't associated to Spain right away. It was associated to Italy because that's where the Greeks first colonized. Then over time, they went to Spain. But there's conflation between that legend, but that's a whole nother story. So the original Atlanteans, they weren't white. They were probably Berber, Egyptian, Hittite, Iranian kind of descent, a mix of tan skin or brown skin. And they're from the land of the sun, we're living under the sun, as Plato says. And then that Bronze Age collapse happens, and then things start to shift. But again, the logic is, it's not that the priest of science is saying our island was destroyed. No, he's actually saying we recovered, even though there's lots of evidence in Egypt of earthquake damage everywhere on some megalithic structures. And there's a show called Ancient Armageddon, just kind of like Ancient Apocalypse, but this was definitely a more mainstream documentary on HBO Max. And Ancient Armageddon, there are scholars in there saying that, yeah, there's definitely evidence we're seeing that there's a lot of major earthquake damage in some of these temples, and they could date to around the Santorini eruption. The problem is they have to move that Bronze Age collapse from the early Bronze Age to the middle Bronze Age. So there's a chance that scholars are definitely wrong about the dates of when this happened, and Plato may actually be right, sort of, but Plato would put it to around 1550 BC if we go by the 900 hypothesis. So that's where you got the old world Atlanteans, which were basically, the biblical world where they were naked. They dressed more seductively in the sense, but in Europe they had to wear more clothes because it was colder on average. So there's a transition. As clothing developed and technology developed, the Europeans expanded. But once Europe ripped into Ukraine, there was tenfold amount of agricultural land compared to what Egypt ever had. But it takes a large population to be able to control all that land. So it took a long time for the Europeans to gain that temperate climate zone. But once the population grew big enough, they became more powerful than Egypt, the Romans. And that's why Europe had a geopolitical advantage compared to other parts of the world because of their geography and their closeness, their proximity to the original Atlantis and Garden of Eden. Because civilization started in the Middle East with Göbekli Tepe and Karen Tepe.
If we look at the sort of corridor from the Turkey region up into the Black Sea, we see the journeys of Jason and the Argonauts going over there to get the golden fleece. And what they found is that there was a big processing center of gold over in the western part or the eastern part of the Black Sea, which is where Jason and his crew were going. So they had a link not only to ancient Egypt, but all the way up into the Caucasus. And we see today the Russian language is based off of the Greek, morphology of their alphabet. So you've got a huge
Phoenicians originally,
right, that through Cadmus, right? But you've got that huge Greek influence, and we see Eastern Orthodox Church up in Russia coming through that Anatolian region. So that the whole connection to up there in the Black Sea region and the Greeks, that's less talked about than the rest of the Mediterranean that they had contact with.
Because most of the trade was definitely coming to Turkey and Egypt and the Palestinian region, because that's where agriculture was really being developed, was more sophisticated compared to what the Greeks, the early Greeks, meaning 700 BC. But then eventually, as they learned that those trades, they did spread up into Ukraine. Well, specifically, the Crimean region is probably where they landed. But most of them probably were still following the coastline of northern Turkey. And then some braved enough went across the Black Sea. But the majority of trade routes are not going up to Europe until the Roman periods. And
for example, the metallurgy is coming through that region into Greece. So they've got
not the majority of metal. The majority of the metal came from the Phoenicians, and that came from the Middle East.
The Greeks were the Scythians, and the Scythian region is all the way up there in the Black Sea Caucasus regions. That's where they got a lot of their mythology from, is through the Scythian influence as well. So they've got
that might have been later. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question just really quick for Peter? Are we, maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse, but are we totally just eliminating like the weird metaphysical, spiritual weirdness with this story? Because
I guess
it has, when you really read Plato is concerned about politics. Even in the Timaeus, 90% of Timaeus is cosmological.
I don't know if I can get on board with him. But like, I feel like, let's just say I'm retarded. It's not hard to do. I do believe that they had like fucking some extra, interdimensional weirdness going on. Maybe some spiritualism, some contacting of like some higher up motherfuckers.
Fallen angel technology.
Realm. Yeah, some shit like that. Like that's where I'm at with it. I mean, I get Plato and like all that stuff. He could be a horrible liar and making shit up too. And I could be definitely wrong. But when I think of Atlantis, even if it's Egypt or like some kind of like a sub-city of Egypt or whatever, all I think about is fallen angel technology, communicating with extraterrestrial, interdimensional, whatever type of spirits, fill in the blank, and like having some kind of like otherworldly technology. Like, you're not going to convince me they built the pyramids with fucking ropes and pulleys. You're not going to convince me that the were like slaves with whips and chains and like stuff like that. Like, you'll never convince me of that in a million years.
So like enemy soldiers, not their own people.
Whoever. I think they fucking levitate shit. Anyways, like if you were to say there's a spiritual aspect to this, like where are you at on it?
Let me get to that slide. Go to the next slide. I think I do show a
okay.
Howard is saying right here, sound resonance. Yeah. Cymatics plays a big role in that.
Actually, go to the next slide. After that, I'll go back to them later. Next one. Let's see. Next one.
JC.
We'll go back. We're not gonna even get to it. Okay, so I love this painting. Okay, so this is kind of a symbolic reference by this artist trying to describe the Timaeus and trying to describe the cosmological world. So yes, Plato is definitely influenced by a spiritual world, but Plato had a little bit more of an atheistic perspective on the cosmology. So he did believe as above, so below. He believed that basically the idea, whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven, and the gods will influence geopolitics. So when the supermassive volcano goes boom, they believe possibility that the gods may have caused the volcano to go boom. Now, did the actual UAPs make the volcano go boom? Probably not. The UAPs were probably just sitting around watching, as the Bible says. They're the watchers. When it comes to actual supernatural interventions into history, if you go back a slide.
You know what I was just thinking though, like real quick.
Sure.
Wasn't it like Marsilio Ficino kind of translating Plato that spurred like the Renaissance, kind of? I mean,
Was
you
he an
can't say the
Italian
motherfucker
guy?
wasn't. Yeah, you can't say the motherfucker wasn't spiritual if we owe the fucking Renaissance.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
mean,
There's definite influence. Like a lot of Christians really give honor to Plato on the
I mean, we
cosmology of
wouldn't
the
have
idea
Neoplatonism either.
of
if it
God
was
and angels and
Platonism.
gods. Yeah. But
That-
again, ultimately at the end of Timaeus, he goes back to saying all this cosmological BS. I mean, not BS, but all this stuff about cosmology. And then he simplifies and say, well, let's go back to talk about war. And it's all just a reference to the war because the Persians were the big bad guy and they're bad. Okay. So he wanted to take all this spiritual stuff and say we need to fight against the Persians, basically. So we go back a slide to actual understanding of supernatural entities. Go back one slide. I'll kind of explain. I think 2 slides maybe. Okay, so this is where this may have nothing to. I'm sorry. Go back. Go forward. I think. Oh, go forward. I'm sorry. Okay, this is. Oh, go back.
It's that one.
There we go. Okay, so this is where this may have nothing to really do in of Plato's perspective, but more of our perspective, because now we do have an anthropological understanding of our past. We do have an understanding that there are lots of evidence of hominids, dozens of bones, hundreds, if not thousands, and more is being found. And something did change in us. And scientists are arguing, anthropologists saying there's something changed with the FOXP2 gene and the NOVA gene in our brain related to language, and the vocal cord larynx elongated and changed its form slightly. And then there's the mutation for us to be able to handle milk for lactose, and that happened around 10,000 years ago. And then there's mutation of the chin. So every hominid that we find that, like Michael talks about, you always want to say, oh, what if these hominids were advanced? No, they're archaic. We can tell clearly by the anatomy. And that's it shows that there's something mutating in us. The question is, can UAPs do small, discrete interventions at the molecular biological level? I would say as a Catholic, I would not rule that out, but it's going to be very discrete. So if evolution doesn't steer us in the right direction, once in a while, maybe these UAPs will intervene at the genetic level, but at a micro, discrete manner that we wouldn't be able to tell. And it completely shifts how we evolve into an advanced civilization. So we go from being in Plato's cave, not understanding the whole world in the big picture as a hominid, and all of a sudden at around 70,000 years ago. So if you want to say there's lost civilizations in the past, it would have to be after 70,000 years ago, because that's when all these mutations start popping up and the birth of art really starts getting hold with the humans, actual modern Homo sapiens going up into Europe and doing paintings there, and those abstract paintings. But other hominids never did abstract paintings. It wasn't conceptual. They didn't have the power of synthetic language. They had communication just like a dog does to some extent, but they could not speak. They were physically impaired by that ability. But all of a sudden, as the Bible says, he blew into Adam, and then Adam became a man. He had the spirit of God. He was in the image and likeness. So something definitely changed us, and evolution does explain like 90% of it. But once in a while, there could be these slight abnormal mutational changes, and these UAPs clearly exist. The question is, how much intervention have they really done in history? Because again, all it took was for one interdimensional being, if you want to believe Jesus was one of them, to intervene in the Roman Empire, and boom, chain reaction of the whole geopolitical worldview, just like that. And it was only 33 years or less. Just a magic wizard man like Gandalf appeared, and boom, it changed history forever. Same thing with Muhammad. Muhammad had an experience, boom, it changes the whole geopolitical chessboard. So angels or these interdimensional beings may have a slight hand in guiding the program or the simulation. But it's not, ultimately, it's the cosmic God or Allah, or, as Plato describes, there is one cosmic God that's hidden. He is ultimately in control of order versus chaos. And there is this kind of trajectory into order. As we move from something ugly and fearful to something beautiful and loving. And that's profound in the planet of this history, because there's no evidence that we have buildings like this back 10,000 years ago. We would have found the foundation stones of the universities. They would have built something like a university if they advanced at our level, but we have nothing. It would not be completely gone. Okay, look at Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore would be there for 1,000,000 years, assuming people don't blow it up. Or Crazy Horse Monument in South Dakota as well. So we have something definitely changed. The question is, did these UAPs have a hand? Absolutely, when it comes to cultural influence. They appear to people, maybe to this one prophet or whatever, or they manifest physically as avatars, poof in and out, and they're influencing culture. And that's what Jacques Vallée is saying. So yes, they are having intervention, but Plato isn't really actually as concerned with the gods as you might think. He's more of like a communist if you actually listen to him at times. He's a little bit more atheistic, but he knows the gods exist, but he's taking the allegory of the gods and making it allegorical for geopolitical reasons, because he's more concerned about politics, like everybody seems to be.
Sorry, I was muted. Do you want me to go on?
Sorry, that was a big rant.
No, you're good.
So if you go back to the David Miano slide, let me go back one more, or just kind of skip around so you can go back one more, I guess. Okay, so this is where I'm going to call out, these two not archaeologists, but historian and archaeologists. I respect Dr. David Miano. Oops, what happened to my earbuds? And Flint Dibble to some degree. Okay, I've reached out to them. Miano is aware of me, but he's ignoring me. He's giving me the silent treatment, but he's aware, and he would probably be open to the hypothesis of Egypt being an influence on Atlantis because of authors or researchers like J. Gwen Griffiths of Oxford University, who's the first to propose it. But he's presenting this to his audience. He's intentionally ignoring it. He's not bringing up the connection between Egypt and the Hittites and the Persians, which would fit with the mainstream archaeological record, other than maybe shifting the Bronze Age collapse to the Middle Bronze Age instead of the earlier or late Bronze Age. Or earlier, sorry, getting confused, like the earlier Bronze Age at 1,200 BC versus 1,600 BC. So that's where I'm open to the possibility that dates are off by a few hundred years at the most. But Flint Dibble and Miano are still focused more on fighting back against more the New Age perspective and not really presenting an actual rational perspective on Atlantis, because they are more liberal and they understand that Atlantis does have connections with the Nazis. Okay, Nazis wanted to take Atlantis and make it their own story, just as Eric von Daniken and Zachariah Sitchin are making things bigger than it really needs to be. They're trying to fit to their national politics. Again, it's political. Things become political even in archaeology and science. And Plato was very political. He wrote the story because he hated the Persians, because they wiped out Athens. So naturally that he's writing these stories to figure out, should we be like the old world or we could be something new? And I would tell Dr. Miano and Dr. Flint Dibble that, yeah, Atlantis is real, but you just need to present these other researchers that you're ignoring, like J. Gwen Griffiths is probably number one, J.G. Bennett, Ulf Richter of Schwabenheim, Germany, and many others. And they're all mostly from Europe. And they figured out this, but they're in other languages, and you have to find the English translations of their work to be able to figure out what they're arguing, which is a lot logical and rational. That even Graham Hancock is starting to shift. He's saying, okay, I understand Atlantis to me is more of a concept for a lost civilization in the Ice Age. And I'm not ruling out there might be another sort of civilization in the Ice Age at the level of Kara Tepe, Göbekli Tepe, another one of those somewhere in the Middle East, or maybe even along the equator zone, as Graham is arguing, is probably where that lost civilization would be. I agree. There's a chance of that. But did they reach the level of Rome and Egypt? Absolutely not. We would have found those megalithic statues at that level, but we don't see it. So Miano and Flint's right. There's no evidence, of transfer of certain types of plants like apples or corn. There's no evidence of glass. Glass wasn't really invented until later periods after the Bronze Age. There was some glass the Egyptians had in the Hittites, but not near at the level until later periods. So glass, we should be able to find glass. You could break down glass, but there'll still be shards. You could tell it would be manufactured. But we've never found any glass in any burial mound ever, other than natural glass. like ones found in Egypt, actually, produced from asteroids millions of years ago. Or iron, like we should be able to find some kind of iron pick would have survived by now, or the fact that all the oil wells are not depleted. There's still abundant amounts of oil. And if you want to show that oil has been depleted, you have to be able to say that there's like no easy oil to extract. But there's plenty of easy oil, which indicates that there was never any advanced civilization within the past 30 million years. Now, 55 million years ago, now we can argue there's a chance there could have been a lost civilization. Or, if you want to expand beyond that.
Out of place artifacts. So you've got in coal deposits in West Virginia, they've got, little trinkets and metal that seems to be from a completely different civilization. We're talking.
I was going to mention that
30 million years ago. Yep.
This was
I was going to mention.
Does it look like a sword? Does it look like a sword?
Back to the lost continent of Mu and Lemuria.
I would need to see those pictures. I've looked at the pick, so-called pick in Texas. That even Joe Christians want to argue is petrified, and I've seen it personally. And there's different types of petrification, but we need to see very clear evidence for something massive, a massive claim like that. And the only thing we have is the Pleistocene, Eocene thermal map.
Yeah, but I mean, as a Catholic, you can understand this. I mean, show me evidence of like half of the shit in the Bible, right? But we all believe it. That's the faith aspect of it. I mean, where's Jesus's bones and like whatever? It's like this is the Plato's faith bones? Aspect.
Yeah, but there's a lot of writings that back up Jesus.
But you cannot. So it takes people like me who might be totally over the fence and crazy, and people like you who are more historical to meet in the middle, and there could be truth somewhere in there. I think 100% like Atlantis, they had like advanced technology. I don't believe in dinosaurs, and like, I think, there could be multiple things that are true at the same time. I don't think you have to necessarily find evidence of Atlantis for it to have existed. It may just have existed in a different state. I don't think so, because I mean, people believe in Santa Claus and shit like that, and they have no evidence of that. Kids. So I mean,
well, you wouldn't have much of a Bible to go by if you don't want to. If you need evidence,
well, there's a lot of things in the Bible. It's the Bible that influenced Plato. Not the Bible, but the ancient scrolls the Hebrews wrote, because the Hebrews carbon dated scrolls are right around the same time as the Greek scrolls. I wonder why, because they're talking with each other.
And it's the same thing with the dinosaurs, I mean, they present to us this evidence and they draw these pictures up for us, but dinosaurs really were never really mentioned. I mean, large lizards were mentioned, dragons more so, big birds maybe, right?
Well, the original motif of the dragon was a serpent. There was the word Leviathan derives from a snake or a whale. There's two debates, whether it's referring to whales or a snake, because in Egypt, what do we find? We literally find ancient whale bones on the surface. So when people, Berber tribes ran across that, they say, hey, that's a Leviathan, because they literally saw a giant bone that's, 50 feet long, or, the spine of it. So that's where they're getting that from. The fact that we have that exposed whale bone, well, some type of ancient whale that's like 50 million years ago.
The Leviathan,
that's evidence.
Many different ancient creatures from many different cultures.
But but the problem is you're
not going to have evidence for all of them.
Yes, because the conflation is, the gods' avatars versus actual animals. So when you say Bigfoot or werewolves, do they exist? Catholics, okay, real Catholics that look into this, absolutely. Bigfoot is real. But it's not an evolutionary creature born from nature. It's just an avatar of an angel or a demon. They can change from a werewolf to a Bigfoot to a gray instantaneously. That's the nature of the gods. This is where Dr. Miano and Flint Dibble don't understand that the conservation of matter can be broken. That law in physics is going to change as UAP disclosure is revealed to people. And Big Brother, the military, the Pentagon, the intelligence agencies are holding everyone's hand right now, so they don't scare the children. We are the children. So the Pentagon is absolutely aware of these entities.
Yeah, I'm 100%. And I'm a Christian, by the way. I'm just saying sometimes you don't need evidence for shit to be real. And I don't believe necessarily in dinosaurs. Okay, there might have been some serpentine creature or something, some shit like that.
But there's lots of bones of dinosaurs.
Yeah, there's a lot of lies
were
that they
they?
tell us too.
You
But,
know,
I mean,
were they bones of dinosaurs? I mean, you know, there's talk of giants in the past, but where are the giant bones? You know,
Okay,
there's
here again, the
dragons in
giants?
people's cultures. You know, there's
The
dragons
Nephilim?
in the Chinese cultures, and I mean, you can say Nephilim. There's giants in every culture as well. They go by different names. You know,
but
you know, you're coming at it from you know, one kind of perspective, and I get that. But
do you literally believe there are giants, like in the sense that we should be able to find a 12-foot skeleton?
1000%, yes,
dude, absolutely.
Skeletons.
I have talked with people. I've made YouTube videos about this, and I know Chuck from CF Apps, the YouTuber that died a couple years ago, he digged into all this. And yes, there are definitely legends about tall Native Americans, and we have archaeological evidence of some Native Americans reaching about 6 to 7 feet. That's not abnormal, really. It's an oddity, but there are 7 feet tall people today. But in the Bible, specifically, people are correlating the Native American legends with the Bible. In reality, they're not the same. Again, you're putting the locale of the Bible into the New World, which has nothing to do with the Old World Bible. In reality, the Nephilim is a reference to the Egyptians and the Hittites. So when they see the megalithic statues,
Og of Bashan was a giant that they still have his burial mound in Israel that they go to. Og of Bashan is one, but they've got several other Canaanite giants in the region. So it's
we need their full skeletons.
Right.
We have hominids all over the place. Where are these giants?
And they're also recording them in the New World. You've got George Washington that mentions pulling out giant skeletons. You've got Abraham Lincoln that mentions all of the giant skeletons in the mounds. You've got
how much of that is exaggerated over time? Because these are newspaper articles.
We don't know how
one person says
live
this at 8 feet, someone then changes, say, oh, actually it was 10 feet. So
right.
I talked to someone in Indiana and they couldn't get the dimensions right. They said, well, this lady thinks saw a 10-foot. I'm like, is that the size of the burial or is that the size of the skeleton? He said, I think it was the size of the skeleton. Or
we could see massive displays of losing the bones by the Smithsonian Institute over and over and over again. When
a government institute
to them, right? Government institutions are trying to, well, I don't know why, but I'm telling you that's what they've done. They've done it over and over again. And we've got a problem in Curacao right now.
Someone will have leaked it out by now.
Confiscate the bones of a giant that's in a museum in Curacao right now, because the Curacao Islands they were referred to by Magellan as the giant islands. Now, Magellan says that he met these giants in person, as well as the people who go down to Patagonia who said that they met giants in person too. So we've got all of these different sources from all of
these ancient stories of all these tribes that talk about meeting.
Yeah, just like Plato's Atlantis, the translations may shift slightly over time, so there might be misunderstandings.
None of these tribes knew each other, though.
Right. All of these tribes were different. They didn't know each other. And they talk about the proportions of the giants being not that of people with gigantism. They are specifically making that claim that it's different from people with gigantism, which they understood. So for them to all be saying that, and then watching the malfeasance of the Smithsonian Institute, as well as other government entities, it's really hard to conclude that it's not a massive conspiracy to cover up this part of us that now we know nothing about.
Maybe it's just like the aliens and stuff. They're covering it up just like the aliens are covering it up.
Well, they've tried, you know.
But
there's no doubt
if the aliens are really just interdimensional beings, it's the interdimensional beings that are actually covering themselves up. The Pentagon has no control over the gods. If the gods want to appear just like that, they could do it, but they're not. So they're being discreet, sneaky, and deceptive at times. So is it possible that they could mutate some humans to produce a few outlier giants 7 to 8 feet tall? Sure. I think there's something definitely weird in Karentepe. There's definitely a reference to 6 fingers, 8 fingers, and some with 4 fingers. I don't know what's up with that. The current hypothesis is that maybe it symbolizes their rank based off the number of fingers. A little odd. I'm not sure yet. Hopefully we find some actual writing or petroglyphs that come out of Göbekli Tepe and Karentepe, but there's something weird there. And the Bible does reference this polydactylism. So the question is there some tradition being passed down from Karentepe and Göbekli Tepe into the biblical records with the reference to polydactylism? Possibly, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that UAPs could mutate a few humans, but it would just be some outliers, a mutation born and then it dies, but it's not persistent where we could see it everywhere. Because some construction worker would have dug it up by now, take a picture and post it on Instagram.
We do have lots of six-fingered handprints from around the American Southwest, including some.
Yeah, there's something to that.
So there is this.
But polydactylism is something possible. Yeah,
right.
I'm not ruling
it is something possible, and if it's related to the giants as well, those are two big glaring coincidences that we need to start taking more seriously, because I think the institutions that are investigating this are not. They're not investigating.
I think that there are many depictions in hieroglyphics of giants too. That I mean, if we're talking about Egypt, there's some fucking hieroglyphics you might want to check out, because there's some giants up in that bitch. But I also don't believe in evolution.
You can't take the art too seriously though, because art is symbolic at times. No, because sometimes a giant symbolizes the power of the pharaoh, not a literal giant.
Yeah, but I mean, some of them might be a metaphor, some of them might be like real shit. But
it could be both.
Also, what did you say, Jules?
I said it could be both.
Maybe
it could be both.
There's not much evidence.
Well,
right. The problem is like we find all of this stuff in the New World, we find all of this stuff in the Old World, and then we see the same institutions coming in and messing up any chance of having a real investigation. And that's the problem, is that if we can't get these ideas taken seriously, at least in some way, shape, or form, the Smithsonian can keep destroying evidence, which they've been caught doing over and over again, especially with the boneyard up in Alaska. They took all of this stuff from the boneyard up in Alaska down to the Smithsonian to put it on display, and they just dumped it in the river. Like, that type of irresponsible behavior needs to be called out, and far too often people just say,
but what type of bone was it? It was a bunch of mammoths?
Like, it was mammoths that they took on behalf of a person.
They didn't care about it then. But if it was human, they would care about it.
Water. No, I don't.
But if it was a human,
I don't think they would tell us either way, to be honest with you, bro.
It's the same thing. It's the Cosmos Club and the Smithsonian Institute working together to keep down certain aspects of society. And we have the Cosmos Club pamphlets and the things that they wrote about saying we need to keep certain truths from the general public. These are the founders of the Smithsonian Institute writing that in the Cosmos Club. This is very important stuff that now we have huge chunks of our own history missing because of the elites that were mismanaging all of this evidence, and they're still doing it to this day, and it's really irresponsible for us.
I think you're letting your political attitude dictate reality here.
It is very political.
Well, that's the problem. It may not be.
They're constantly looking
not
at
everything
us
is a conspiracy.
Flint Dibble, for instance. Flint Dibble looks at us like we're children, and having that perspective from these institutions looking at us like we don't know what we're talking about all the time is so tiring. We're all fatigued by it. We're all fatigued
because the devil's in the details.
We ask questions. For example, and we get irresponsible answers.
Let me speak on Dan. Dandy Dunker said that he was trying to say that Atlantis is Easter Island. But we know, you can literally look it up yourself and read that Plato says elephants and it doesn't rain. And there's lots of gold. So it makes no sense that he would make that claim. But because Dan is trying to make the concept bigger than what actually Plato was saying. He's ignoring details intentionally, or he's not reading it, or he doesn't care. That's what Dr. Mian are calling out, and I'm going to call that out too.
I agree. It should be called out, but the patriarchal methodology that they use to keep the public away from certain inconvenient facts about their own history is really, really tiresome. I mean, there's no way that we can all just say the Smithsonian Institute doesn't have their hands dirty when it comes to mismanaging all of these artifacts. There's a reason why Trump recently signed a document saying we need to have a full accounting of what's going on in the Smithsonian. They've been outside of the control of the American people for a long time now, and we need to get that.
It's not the Smithsonian. It's the intelligence agencies. If there's, let me tell you, for someone who's been in the military, if they find something in Iraq that looks like a mutated human or a chimera or anything like that, the first people that are going to get it will be the military, and then they're sending it off straight to the intelligence agencies to be locked up. That I believe. The Smithsonian, on the other hand, is not going to get access to that.
The Smithsonian is an intelligence agency.
CIA will go straight to the Smithsonian director and say, "You give us that, or we're going to drain your bank account."
Dude, the
It's
Smithsonian
really
the
the
is
intelligence agencies that have control
it's all
over
the
art.
same thing, brother. That's what we're trying
Right.
to.
It's all
Yeah,
the
but
same thing. We're just trying
They
to
are
get
separate
more civilian
institutions, and
control.
there's one more powerful than the other because one has a
We
gun,
get
the
it.
other one does not.
Yeah, but the
it's
entity,
patriarchal,
you know.
right? It's the patriarchal nature
Yeah.
of how they treat us, and they cover for the people who are pressuring them instead of exposing it to the people who should know about it. And that's the big problem, is all throughout the institutions we find that same attitude, which is why a lot of people get upset about this topic, because of the fact that there is so much obfuscation. You know,
There's a
I
lot
think
of liberals. I
dialogue
think that
is
really
great.
there's too many liberal archaeologists like these two historians speak out, but there's not enough more conservative or rationalistic or realistic archaeologists out there to speak out. And that's why you're getting this conflict. 'Cause I'm noticing a divide. Yeah, on Dandy Dunker, Graham, or Jimmy from Bright's Insight, a lot of them are right leaning, and then you're encountering more the left leaning academics, and you're colliding. And there's not too many centrists like me to speak out and say, yes, there really was Atlantis, and it definitely has something to do with the Middle East. And it's
Right.
probably Egypt, because as Robert Preval said, or not Robert Preval, what's the guy that went on Joe Rogan that died? Oh, he had the white beard. I'm blanking on his name. But he was saying that, there basically was an Atlantis to Joe Rogan. It had something to do with Egypt. I think it was, oh man, I'm blanking out, sorry. But I agree with Robert Preval and others that Egypt could be older, because I do see artifacts that do have margin of errors. The dates of the Exodus has a margin of error. Santorini has a margin of error. So when you add all these up, yes, there is something off with the dating records on things. And archaeologists should be open to that, but they do ignore the fact that, yeah, actually Santorini could be 1668 BC or 1700 BC. Is there a connection with the Indus Valley migration and collapse? And they say, well, we want to get to that because it complicates things. Well, yeah, it might complicate things. Okay, let's actually look at Plato and see there is some historical historicity that's shaping his worldview. Real things. Elephants are real. The sun is real. The gods are real to some extent. We call them UAPs, or angels and demons. Could they be aliens? The evidence isn't strong enough yet for that. So let's go to the last slide, and I'll just kind of end it here. Let's see. Yeah. So, for example, I'm definitely open to the possibility of something even more macro than the story of Plato's Atlantis. Like, could there have been a lost civilization at 55 million years ago? Yes, Dr. Flint Dibble and Miano should be open to that possibility, because when you're going back 55 million years ago, now entropy has enough time to completely alter things. Oil would be replenished, so it wouldn't be just depleted. It takes about 30 to 50 million years for that to be replenished. So there's a possibility. Mount Rushmore would be completely gone. Okay. Crazy Horse Monument as well. So yeah, things could completely erode by that time scale, but not just within the past 12,000, 15,000 years. No, or even 100,000 years. Mount Rushmore would still exist 200,000 years from now. It would be hard to notice it, but you could see some stylistic carving on it. But if you want to even go bigger, you could say even the pre-Carnian Peluvian event 230 million years ago, a massive extinction event, could have completely wiped off a civilization. A massive rain event that happened there, but it has nothing to do with any biblical stories, Plato stories, nothing at all, completely disconnected. Same thing with Venus. There's a real possibility that Venus could have been just like Earth, more so than Mars, because the sun was smaller, and then it was more in the habitable zone, and Venus may have actually had a moon. And the hypothesis is that moon may have been Mercury. If that's the case, there's a high probability Venus would have had a civilization, because they now have detected, according to the Japanese space agency, that they found granite. They detect the chemical signature of granite and phosphine. So it's looking very likely there's a possibility that, if Venus has a civilization, now what does that mean with the whole aspect of religion and the supernatural and paranormal things? Because it shows that, this idea of Jesus, like, is he an avatar? What do we mean by avatar? Is he the debate on whether he's an interdimensional being? How many Jesuses have there been? Or is there different angels or interdimensional beings for every planet, but they're not the same being? So this does have a theological implication in the long run, which I'm open to. But we got to wait until they send those satellites back to Venus, which Japan, Russia are going to do in the 2030s. It's going to change the conversation big time in the late 2030s, I would say. And I would definitely be open. Like C.S. Lewis was open to the possibility that Venus could have had a lost civilization. And now, okay, it wasn't going to be within our timeline, but hundreds of millions of years ago. Because right now, NASA's only found about 12 out of 6,000 exoplanets may be considered super habitable, but that only means it has plants. Doesn't mean it has a civilization, because our civilization is like a blip in time on Earth. So it's hard to line up space and time. Venus is so close to us, but they're separated by time. So there really are probably extraterrestrials, but they're probably stuck on their Garden of Eden just as we are. And that's the sad reality, probably. The Fermi paradox truly is a thing, and the great filters. And we're not going to, as Carl Sagan said, our civilization is like 1 second of 365 days of the Earth's lifespan. What happens in that next second? We're going to just be gone. And maybe 200 million years later, another one pops up. Your backyard squirrel evolves to be the next hominid. It could recycle, but it's going to have to be at a larger scale, not shorter scale as Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock kind of want to believe on the recycling of civilization.
Do you believe in hominid carcinization? This is a theory I'm coming up with. So you've got all these crabs that are not the same as like each other. They're different species of crabs, but they all look like crabs, right? They're all shaped in the same way because of carcinization, where everything that gets to that level of evolution starts to look like a crab. Well, what if there's a hominid version of that where every ape or whatever that gets to this level of evolution starts to look like a human?
Yes, and I think there's that hypothesis, the dinosauroid hypothesis. So like 55 million years ago, is there a possibility that Troodon would evolve to look more hominid-like? And yeah, because there's some basic laws of physics. You need at least 4 fingers and some kind of an external appendage at a certain angle to be able to grasp a tool in the right way, to be ambidextrous, or be able to write and maneuver material in a more efficient manner than a dog can. A dog can't write. It doesn't have the right anatomy at all. It has to be the right form. So this is why, instead of calling intelligent design, I would say intelligent programming. And that's mainly due to the anthropic principle, like the way the laws of physics works inevitably leads to a natural form that is made in the so-called image and likeness of the gods. Now, again, the gods are purely spiritual that could take avatar forms, but is there a possibility that these so-called UAPs are not just immortal gods that were always immortal, but the hypothesis that maybe they were from planets and then they become a god? Because that's what the Egyptians believe, that humans become a god, but a small g god, not the big cosmic one, but you move up the ranks of the heavens and a higher evolutionary spiritual form, I guess. And that's a possibility that some of these UAPs we experience may be entities that were born from Venus 1 billion years ago, and now they're immortal and flying around, screwing around with us. That's a weird way to look at it, but I think there's one NASA professor or NASA administrator was talking with Diana Pasoka and was kind of bringing up that idea, sort of. But that's out there, and I'm open to that possibility, that because people say that Mary is manifesting as something like a UAP, and then you get this Pentagon document called the Immaculate Constellation, a wink wink to the Virgin Mary. I'm like, well, why are they doing that? And then you make you wonder, okay, is Mary a god? What do we define as a god? Is she an angel? What do we define as an angel? What's it considered immortal? So the hierarchy and nature of angels is pretty complicated, but it comes down to basically their power level in some sense. They're not all equal in their power, and they go up the rank, up the ladder. So some may truly have been from Venus for all we know, but they're no longer, humans. They're not dependent on the planet anymore. They have become transcendent to a higher reality.
I guess you'd have to believe in space to agree with that closing statement. But I mean, I'm not trying to like gang up on you or anything. I really enjoy presentations like this. I mean, there's been some real rock stars in the comment section tonight. Maybe this is somebody from you, Jules. Nephilim Hunter 007. Is that from you?
Yeah. Shouts
All
out
right.
Nephilim Hunter.
Well,
007.
I like this fucking guy.
He's dangerously
or girl.
retarded.
That's all right with me, because so am I, right? But yeah,
hey, I'm retarded at math, so
I think multiple things could be true at the same time. This is really interesting. I do still think that Atlantis could possibly have existed at one time. Maybe it's advanced civilization, maybe it wasn't, but it's
I would say
definitely
Egypt was pretty
interesting.
advanced relative to the Greeks and the Romans. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not
but
really
I
no.
mean,
They built giant pyramids.
yeah, that's the thing though that you and I schism on is I think like they had some help, like not ropes and pulleys and shit like that, but like levitation and
Sound resonance.
sound
But it
resonance,
depends
stuff
if-
like that.
But what if the gods don't give you that power? We don't know how much power these
But what if they
instrumental beings
do?
might actually give us. They might say, "Go ahead and slave away and use ropes and pulleys. We're not going to help you." Why should they care?
What if someone figured it out, or I don't know, what if they were passed down this knowledge in a download or a vision or a dream,
Right.
maybe?
Again, it all
Something,
depends
something.
on the gods.
What if the gods created the pyramid?
What-
You know, there's those theories as well.
Yeah,
Like I
but
said,
there's lots of
theory,
evidence
you
to
know,
say that.
but
I'm open to the possibility. Like there's someone on Twitter named Third Eye Seeks, and Third Eye Seeks and I are kind of. I don't know if you guys know him, but he goes around last year and talks about how the pyramids are kind of built and the possibility that they had to use more advanced levers and cranes and pulleys at the level of Rome or Persia. So, and that some of that knowledge was lost and then rediscovered by the Romans and the Persians. So they actually were a little bit more advanced because the technologies and the techniques they would have used would have been very similar to how they built the cathedrals of Europe. So how the Masons built that is probably what they've learned from how the Egyptians built their temples. So they probably had cranes, they had pulleys and levers, but in a complicated form. So if you look up, for example, the image of the Cleopatra's Needle in Central Park that the Freemasons had moved, they had this giant scaffolding, not levitating, but suspending it in a fulcrum, the whole obelisk. And they could tilt it with ropes and different pulleys, and they used metal, of course, and horses, hundreds of horses. And it was a complicated thing. And they did it. And then the Vatican did the same thing, and the column in St. Petersburg did the same thing. But it was a complicated system. It wasn't just a bunch of people pulling with ropes. No, they had to develop an architectural scaffolding system with mechanical advantages to be able to move this whole thing, even wheels. So, yeah, I think the Egyptians had more. Yes, exactly. The Egyptians could
Is that a real picture?
Just like that. That's a
Oh
real
my God!
that a real
no, well, no, that's
Stop it. That's
that
what
is
I'm
a
thinking.
that's not the original picture. That's a scan. Looks
It
like
is.
a rescan.
That's the original picture that they scanned, but
That's a
is that a real
drawing.
picture?
But yeah,
See, no, it looks like the people in the foreground. This is 1881, I believe. It looks like the people in the foreground. No, that's definitely a drawing, but yeah, this is
this
how
was
they
a
say
redrawing of
movie.
that picture. Yeah, there's another one. But there's a
This
column
was-
in Alexandria too. You could look up that. But a lot of them are drawings, yes. But because they
Right.
didn't have photography back then, so sure.
Or
they might
because
draw
it didn't
first.
fucking happen that way. And they had to draw some shit up to make you think that they built it when they fucking didn't build it at all. Anyways,
But they did.
that's
How
another
else would they have moved it?
podcast.
They
That's
moved
what I'm
dozens
saying,
of
dude.
obelisks.
You got it. That's what I'm saying, though. Is you said not everything is a conspiracy. What I'm telling you is it fucking is.
No,
Every little
not
thing is
Something.
a
Yep.
conspiracy. I
So
don't
this is
believe
where-
in anything.
Yeah, look at
This
that.
is
That's a
where
real
they're,
photo.
They're picking it up. This is a real
Let's
photo,
go,
right?
Julia.
But it doesn't show
Yeah,
it
from the boat.
moving, and it
Of
doesn't
course,
show
it's a
them putting it
photo.
on the boat.
They don't have video cameras back then.
Well,
but there was
no,
on a
they've
boat.
got cameras.
They had
definitely
So
got
primitive
cameras.
convenient.
But you don't
It's
trust that
just a
photo?
strange
I mean,
thing.
it comes down to your trust. If you don't trust in basic society,
It's true. Look,
then yeah, you're
here's
not going to
another.
believe it.
Here's another drawing that they made.
Yeah, that's a
So-
drawing.
But what
Right,
what
that's
average
the-
person do you think owned the camera back then?
Yeah, there weren't that many cameras back then, of course. So
That's
you
what
have to be a little bit logical.
the
and
elite
accept
people
that.
owned cameras, right?
Here's
Yeah.
a drawing.
So
Here's a drawing, right? So
You
we got
guys
the
all a bunch of
drawings
communists, the elites.
no, we just
a
you
little
know,
bit.
describe
just
what,
very-
what we see
Now,
in our lived
here's-
There are
experience.
some conspiracies. UAPs definitely have been hidden from us intentionally.
Here's
And
a
it's
picture.
understandable, I think, to some degree.
Well, here's a
See-
picture, right? That
see,
looks
now-
like an
Yeah,
inflatable
that's a real
device.
picture, I think.
Now, you know what's funny is that you think that some of the stuff we think is silly, but I actually think that you listening to Lou Elizondo is fucking ridiculous.
Yeah.
That
It's
guy's
not just Lou.
scam artist.
He wasn't even in the know until someone in
That guy's in
the
nothing,
deep
man. He's
state
a
went to
fucking
him.
scam artist.
I
Yeah, a
don't
lot of
think so.
those guys, man. they've been
What about David
compromised.
Grush?
They're cooked.
What about the 4 Air Force pilots?
Man,
They're all in on it.
Is in that UAP shit.
I mean, would they allow them to speak if they weren't in on it, man? I mean, look at history.
You're
Look
correct.
at what we've seen in the past.
What's his name? Greer
This is
or
no
whatever.
different.
Greer, yeah.
You
Greer
guys
was
are
very
watching.
heavily tied
It's
in.
another fucking shill too, dude. Come on.
Yeah, he was very closely tied into the Clinton administration. Like all of his
I agree.
stuff from back in the 90s were very close to the government, and that was his message. It seems really ridiculous now looking back.
The whole UAP topic, it's definitely a top-down approach. It's the people at the very top who want to disclose it. It started under the Obama administration. Obama must have signed something to give the Geospatial Intelligence Agency clearance to begin the process, because it's that institution that holds the servers that have the classified videos from the 80s and the 90s and so forth. So sure, I agree. It's definitely top down. All these officers, they cannot publicly speak without permission from their superiors. I agree. But yes, it's from the top down because the Pentagon knows they can't control the phenomenon. What happens if the phenomenon does do something that's ontological, like in 2011 over the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem? That was a real event. And Fox News just kind of showed the wrong video, and CNN just, it's probably just something fake. But there are 5 different angles of that shot in 2011. Something happened over there. And after that event,
we can
all
agree
of a sudden,
on that. I think so too. I think that was some real shit.
Yeah, the Obama administration said, okay, maybe we should begin the process of disclosure because we can't hide the phenomenon, because the phenomenon is going to people like me. And there's now, in my case, I didn't get on video because the phenomenon happened to be too sneaky and clever and realized I wanted to get on video and wouldn't let me. Sounds like an excuse, but these entities are very sneaky, very deceptive, and they're very powerful relative to us. So yeah, it's very hard to prove the existence of interdimensional beings, but we now have cameras for the first time ever on this planet in the past 100 years, and they're starting to appear. The veil is lifting.
I think
the Pentagon has to prepare for that. It's not just the Pentagon, it's Japan.
I think these people that run the Pentagon have been channeling these beings. In
the early periods, maybe, but they realize they can't control them. Well, the Nazis tried it, and they failed.
Well,
the Nazis got screwed by the jinn.
Yeah, it's not just the Nazis. So it's every, you would say political organization or who has power at the time.
In the 1800s, I think there was an attempt to try to see if they could summon these entities using so-called psionics to gain some kind of power. The Nazis were definitely doing this, and the Americans learned it from the Nazis. But ultimately, the Vatican is saying, you can't control the gods. Plato said that. You can't control the gods. Don't trust the damn gods because they will mess with you. And they absolutely do, because 50% of them are basically purely demonic. And the other 50% are very discreet and sneaky, but they don't want to show themselves full images of ball plasma that can shapeshift into metal. But I talk about this on Rebirth's channel a lot. We have a whole 2 hours of this, so you guys can check that out on Rebirth's channel.
Right. Well, we're back to the gods. I think that's the important part. I think we're all in agreement.
Christians don't like me saying that, but what's the
I'm a Christian and I'm here for it. I've been saying that this whole fucking
angels,
show.
Whatever.
That's yeah.
So
I'm a follower.
We're all in agreement.
More on the mystic side, but
yeah.
Right. So
I
they told us for 2,000 years that they didn't exist, and now we're back to it. They killed millions and millions of people, telling them that the gods didn't exist, and now we're back to it. So I think that's really kind of interesting. Now we're back to the gods.
Did you hear what's his name? Carl Nell. Carl Nell spoke at the SALT conference. He basically said it's not really a discovery. It's more like a rediscovery of these entities. He didn't call them gods. He's trying to avoid religious terminology intentionally. But he's saying it wouldn't be that shocking for the average Christian or Muslim or even Buddhist, because they believed in this stuff. Because back in the old days, summoning the gods for warfare was a common thing. I mean, it was just like normal. They just didn't know how to prove it.
I think
now
it still is,
brother. They invade countries on certain days during a certain time of year. They plan this stuff out. These old gods are still implicated in everyday goings on, brother.
They just cut off.
I don't think they're as
see it
powerful
through
as
the
we think they
symbolism.
are.
You can see who they venerate through the symbolism, man. It's very easy to tell. You should look into some of it, brother.
Well, that's why all the ancient cultures, like the ones
if you believe in this stuff, dude, you should look into esoteric symbolism and all the occult.
Yeah, I've listened to
definitely worth it.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Jules. all the ancient civilizations that you're talking about, Göbekli Tepe, the Karen Tepe place that was nearby Göbekli Tepe, all these fucking blood pits and shit, and the Egyptians, and they were all sacrificed and fucking, even Graham Hancock's like, look at this odd structure, it looks like a blood pit. Yeah, because they were all doing some fucking weird Babylon fucking sacrificing babies and shit. They all wanted to consort with some type of weird entity, and the Aztecs and the fucking blood rituals. I mean, they all did it, and they were
Jesus
all trying
came to put a stop to that because
of course,
they were
I agree with you on that,
gods.
But they
just sort of stopped. Okay, we're not baby sacrificing over top of skyscrapers.
Washington D.C.
They still do that shit. It's just covered
in India.
up.
Yeah, in India.
No, in
place.
The U.S. The government is run by satanic fucking pedophiles.
Yeah, dude, absolutely.
We've got so much mystical symbolism in Washington, D.C. alone that why would they keep all of that knowledge and then put that into the streets unless there was something more to it than just...
Well, because they believe Atlantis was Egypt.
Well, they believe in
later Freemasons believe that.
They believe in something
they believe that... Yeah, they believe America was like the new Atlantis. The new Rome.
Yeah, the new Rome, right? New York, you know.
Yeah, it's all just European culture being inherited over here. I mean, that's natural. It comes the same thing with Chinese culture and being inherited by Japan. But that's not really a conspiracy; it's just a phenomenon.
We don't really have access to it anymore. Like they're not teaching this stuff as being part of our history. Like the streets of Washington D.C. should be. I
wouldn't put so much faith.
I learned this in college,
man. I wouldn't put so much faith in college either, man. We may sound schizo, but you know, we just
Freemasonry is something that influenced America, definitely. That's not a secret.
And they don't talk about it,
but they're not as powerful as they used to be.
Well, there's a point to that. They're cutting us off from that knowledge and they're keeping it for themselves. And that's what we constantly see over and over again today with the very same organizations. So there is a continuity there. We're left in the dark all the time, and it's time that changes. We need to get a little bit more respect from our government because they don't really represent us at all. And that's the issue that everybody's sort of coming into, is that we're at a point right now where we have to stop identifying.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's not just that. It's it's our souls on the line here, you know? We have to resist
when it comes to the whole Atlantis war, in some sense, it hasn't really ended because it's still being invoked with Israel, because Israel is basically influenced by the Greek civilization, and they're sort of taking over the original Atlantean world, and there's still a collision there. But it's not conspiratorial in the sense; it's more geopolitical, because the geography is so shitty, it forces wars. If you had open land like in the Midwest, you can force your way a lot faster and unify that region if you have horses. I mean, that's why the Native Americans couldn't conquer or fight back, because they didn't have enough horses. They didn't have enough guns. They didn't have a big enough population. They're wiped out by a disease, so they lost. And that's because of geography. Ultimately, it comes down to the landscape and geography that dictates which civilization can be more powerful than another. That's why China is going to be very powerful, because they got 1 billion people, because it comes down to the law of natural selection, survival of the fittest. It's power politics ultimately. And I learned that at the University of Iowa. And it sucks that, Israel basically wants to genocidally murder people out so they can gain more strategic real estate to put their hotels on. It's sad, but that's the sad reality. But it comes down to land.
I would agree with Flint Dibble on this. The story about how the mound builders were wiped out by these current Native Americans was a motivating factor in westward expansion, right? They said that these people who built these mounds that, they had all these cities based around, were more like the Europeans, and the people who wiped them out were the Native Americans. So that gave us license to expand westward. That was one of the big motivating factors of that time period. And I think it did, because everybody knew of the stories of Atlantis, and they understood that there was somehow a much wider Aryan civilization that was sort of out there in the New World that they were coming to. This was a lot of the mythology that came through the.
That's more of a white nationalist perspective. Yes, Columbus sort of Columbus was just trying to discover Japan.
Right, with the Knights Templar, who are re-emerging as a factor now in all of this discussion around anthropology. they were talking about that stuff. That was their founding
it was an
mythology.
ideological thing at the time.
The founding fathers were all into the Knights Templar stuff, and we're even finding stuff like that today coming out of these statues that they tore down back in 2020. They found postcards that had Knights Templar seals and symbols on them. That was a huge factor in the United States government, and we don't. Again, the Lee boys,
but ultimately,
very much Knights Templar.
It's not really the ideology of just the Knights Templar or the Freemasons. It's more the fact that there's a big river there that has a lot of freaking water. We want that river. Get that river. So that's why do you think Russia is invading Ukraine? They want the Dnieper River, and they're going to conquer everything up to that river because rivers, strategic real estate, or resources. That's the ultimate thing. So when people say, "Oh, we're gonna go, defend Israel and expand Israel because Israel's being attacked and all that," in reality, no. Israel just wants to expand their border on prime real estate to secure the state more, and they will murder people out to do it. It doesn't matter if you're a democracy, a communist state, or a fascist state. It ultimately is land is forcing you to become dictatorial or fascist because of scarcity. Because as Neil deGrasse Tyson said, this planet is not as habitable as people think. Only like 20% or less of the land surface is habitable. Imagine if that was 50%. There wouldn't be as many wars because you have more plentiful resources. But the fact that, 50% of the United States is desert and the Middle East is pretty much all desert except for the Garden of Eden of Egypt and Atlantis, I guess you could say. And, China is so confined in that one region of the Yellow River, it forces these wars to happen because there's a scarcity. It's because of scarcity that forces these geopolitical agendas. It's not just ideology. Ideology is a justification to go murder people, just as the Catholics did that.
Neil deGrasse
States was justification.
Tyson, listen, Peter. Even my baby's upset. Okay.
I don't agree with everything he says, but he's right. The Earth is trying to kill us, and that's why there's so much war because we're fighting for prime real estate. That's a logical argument. It's nothing conspiratorial, but there are conspiracies that people make up to justify stealing land. Like Israel wants to expand up to the Tigris River. That's insane. All right, I don't support that.
I've got right here the Rosy Cross Order 68th convocation of the Rosy Cross. This is in Pennsylvania.
Heard of that?
Yeah, that's the Great Seal of the United States being unveiled in this occult literature.
Yeah, Jews had a big influence.
16 years, but no, this isn't the Jews. This is the Knights Templar and the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons. They all got together up in Pennsylvania and had this 68.
A lot of Freemasons are Jews. I'll let you know that they're definitely.
Not Catholic.
I
know.
Well, yeah,
I know, but I'm saying like this
is influenced by.
Yeah.
Right.
Judaism.
So again, in this book, they talk about Atlantis, right? They talk about Atlantis and they say that it stretches from Mexico all the way over to Africa. This was their opinion on Atlantis, and this was back in 1916. I know, but I'm saying like this is within the milieu of their mythology. And
is
this
that
is what they're teaching
or that's just them having an opinion.
No, it's like the Israel thinks that they're the chosen people of God. Well, the real chosen people were the Egyptians, and the early Jews were Egyptians, and they weren't, Ukrainians and Russians. Okay, that moved to Israel. Like, people will use ideologies and shapeshift it to manipulate geopolitical gains.
Absolutely.
So America, because of Christopher Columbus naming the first islands the Antilles, the Masons started to believe that America basically was Atlantis. But then that shifted as the nations down. They said, well, maybe it's in the little Atlantic Ocean. And then that kind of shifted. So, but modern scholars now no longer believe that because now we have abundance of amounts of evidence. And to say that it doesn't make any logical sense because now we can compare it with other writings of Plato and say Plato was just talking about the Middle East where all of our problems come from.
Right. So this group specifically is saying under the authority of the Rose Cross Order founded in America in 1858, prominent delegates of the order were gathered in the most remarkable conclave held during the last 5,000 years, the publication of whose records now opens the world and connection of Egypt in her ages of true religion, power, and glory with the mystical seal of the United States, whose heraldic symbolism declaring the mighty destiny of America has until now only been known to a limited number. He's saying that there is a huge connection between America, Atlantis, and Egypt, right? Your theory
at the
is
time,
right there
they
in
didn't
the
know
literature.
Yeah.
They're
But
talking about
they still
the same thing you are.
separated though. I think they still thought they weren't sure. The Masons weren't sure if Egypt was Atlantis in the 1850s until maybe I think under Madame Blavatsky and other occultists, they started to realize that it definitely had something to do with Egypt. But as archaeology expanded and we were starting to really figure it out, we realized that, yeah, it does have something to do with Egypt, especially in the 1850s. And that's why an obelisk was placed there. It wasn't just for George Washington. It was to say that we are the new Atlantis. We are the new
And
Rome.
it was Egyptian. They're the new Atlantis, and it's Egyptian. So they were on board with the
monotheism started in Egypt. It wasn't the Jews. Right. I mean, it was the pre-Jews, which were Egyptians, not, Ashkenazi Jews from Russia.
Right. So all I'm saying is that they would agree with you on your thesis that they were probably talking about Egypt. The difference is that they also believed that Egypt was in the New World as well, which was a big part of their theories of expanding westward, is their adoration for Egypt and their willingness to look for the things that they kept secret from all the rest of the world.
Yeah. And I think they saw similarities in the architecture of Mesoamerica.
Yep.
Yeah, because that one priest, the archaeologist, was his name, the French guy, he's the one that first proposed there's a connection really with Central America and Egypt. And then a lot of Freemasons ironically adopted that Catholics believe. And even though he was basically wrong, I mean, there might have been some distant connection because there are trade winds that go straight to Mesoamerica. If you took from Egypt, sure, but it's like a one-way route unless you have more advanced sailing techniques. But we don't see evidence that Egypt had advanced sailing techniques at the level of Christopher Columbus's ships. They were using their ships mainly in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Nile. It wasn't designed to go across the Atlantic. So sure, a few may have ended up in Central America, but they got stranded there. Maybe they had a slight influence on the American cultures there. That's a possibility. I wouldn't rule that out. But I think that's more of the Freemasons' ideology in the early periods, wanting to believe that the Americas was basically Atlantis. But I don't think modern day Freemasons believe that anymore. Maybe Randall Carlson. Well, Randall believes in the Azores more because of that map. But Randall is not your normal Freemason. Yeah, it's hard to say. But again, people's ideas in the old days, 1800s, even then, it's shifted so much because we have so much technology now and archaeological evidence to change what actually is the reality. And the reality is it all goes back to the Middle East.
I will
That's
say,
your Atlantis, sadly enough.
When I was at the Cosmic Summit, out of all the Freemasons, Randall Carlson was the only one with 3 bodyguards and another truck behind him. So yeah, he's not like a real Freemason.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if he's even still in a lodge. I mean, he was a former Freemason, but I don't know if he's already practicing.
We're gonna wrap it up. Jules had to leave actually. Oh no, he's there. He's there.
Oh,
not to cut you off. It's been over 2 hours.
That's fine. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, no,
it's good discussion, lively.
Yeah, it was fun. Real quick, Peter, do you want to let everybody know where they can find you stuff?
Yeah, you can check me out my YouTube channel at Enigma Seeker, or on Rebirth's channel, or on YouTuber Suspect Sky. I made a few videos and been on their podcast. I've also been Mike and Dave's channel. We did a little talk about Atlantis there. And yeah, there's a few others I've been on.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Everybody else, I'm not gonna, because Jules has got to get going. I'm not gonna waste the time.
Oh, you're dude. That's fine. I'm
you're
good.
right. Okay,
Yeah,
it's really real quick. Let everybody know where they can find your amazing work.
Thanks. Obviously these are just my opinions. Thanks everybody in the chat, and thanks for being a team player, Peter, because I know we had some differing opinions. And I think it's important not to be a candy ass, though. I'm going to tell you what I think, and you can debate me, and that'll just make me have to prove myself, which is great. We should all be challenged from time to time. If you like anything I said, you can check out Cosmic Peach Podcast. But thanks for having me, Nick. It was really fun. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much, Julie. And Headless Giant, sir.
Thank you very much. You can find me at the Headless Giant on Twitter and on Instagram and on YouTube. This Sunday, we've got the trialogues coming up with Ethan and Ricardo, and that's going to be an awesome time. And as well as a big discussion about, oh man, I'm blanking. What is it, Nick?
What?
The guy later on in the day with Mithras.
Oh, yes.
A big Mithras.
That's at 11.
That's at 11. Yeah,
I
we have
think.
Mithras at 11, and then at 5, I got this guy from Mayan Astrology.
You got it. It's going to be awesome. And then
Yeah,
I've got Alchemy Mondays coming up and my mailbag as well. If you send me an email at headlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com about your occult experience, we can get some stickers out to you. So definitely send me your email with your address and we will get that up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. And real quick, Jules, let everybody know what's up with you, man.
Guys, it was a fun show. Great presentation, man. Y'all can find me on Twitter at GrayPillPod, Instagram GrayPill_podcast. I'm on Rumble, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. Patreon.com/GrayPillPodcast. Doing a lot of cool things over there. You get a free sticker pack. We do Patreon exclusive content, esoteric book reviews. Go check out the one from this morning before I make it private. It was a good time. We had Nick and Headless there with me, Subliminal, and Rat. Next week we're reading the Enigma Elish, so that should be fun. But yeah, check out our show we did last night on the I'm blanking, the Serpent in the Rainbow with Ani and Robert. I'm blanking on names, dude. Robbie Marks. It was a great time. Banger episode. Y'all check out our episodes tomorrow. I'll be doing a deep dive tomorrow night. I'm pretty sure my part 2 on the Green Man. So y'all keep a lookout for time posted on that. Patreon's the best way to support the show. And look out this next week. I got a bunch of shows. I think Robbie, speaking of Robbie, he's coming on this next week. Wednesday. Him and Doc both book Wednesday night, so I'm gonna have to work that out somehow. So one of them will be Wednesday night, maybe the other one Monday, or I don't know. I have to get at them tomorrow. And then Dana from Rotting Jewels will be on Thursday. So that's going to be a banger. And me and Headless have our Rustic Gods episode that we'll be doing this week, probably next weekend, since we're so busy this weekend. So y'all stay tuned for that. But until next time, everybody, this was a great episode.
All right. Again, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you all, and thank you everybody in the chat. I appreciate it. There was a lot of comments on everybody's channel over there. I was stuck in the chat actually at one point. So thank you all very much. There's definitely some stuff in there. Definitely check out. And again, thank you all for coming on the show. I really appreciate everybody making the time for it. And that is the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one tomorrow, everybody be well. Later.